Forget what you've been told about the past, start with what doesn't make sense. Because history isn't just a record of what happened, it's a record of what survived. And survival has rules. It keeps what can be understood and quietly discards what cannot. But sometimes something slips through, fragments that don't fit the narrative, results without context, precision without a visible method. And those fragments don't fade, they persist, repeating across time as if they belong to something larger we can't see. That's where the real mystery begins, not in what ancient civilizations achieved, but in what didn't make it into the version of history we inherited. A dense rainforest stretches across northern Guatemala, concealing the ruins of a city that should not have been able to survive. At Tikal, a metropolis that reached its peak more than 2,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered evidence not of primitive adaptation, but of something disturbingly advanced. A water purification system that mirrors modern filtration technology with unsettling precision. This is not simply a story about water, it is a story about knowledge that appears to exist out of place in time. The discovery did not happen all at once. For decades, archaeological efforts at Tikal were driven by a different fascination. Towering pyramids piercing through the jungle canopy, intricate carvings documenting dynasties, and plazas that once held tens of thousands of people. These findings reinforced a familiar narrative that the Maya were brilliant astronomers and architects, but still limited by the technological boundaries of their era. Yet beneath this narrative, a more fundamental question lingered, largely unanswered. How did a city of such scale sustain life in an environment that offered no reliable river, no permanent fresh water source, and no natural infrastructure for long-term water security? At its peak, Tikal supported a population estimated between 50,000 and 100,000 inhabitants. This is not a small ceremonial center. It is a dense urban ecosystem. Modern cities of comparable size rely on complex water treatment plants, pipelines, and continuous supply systems. Tikal had none of these. Instead, it depended almost entirely on rainfall collected, stored, and preserved in a network of reservoirs. In a tropical region where the wet season is intense but the dry season can stretch for several unforgiving months, this dependence should have been catastrophic. Stagnant water breeds bacteria. Organic decay contaminates reservoirs. Toxic compounds accumulate over time. By every modern expectation, such a system should have failed. And yet, it didn't. The turning point in understanding came not from monumental architecture, but from microscopic analysis. In the early 21st century, researchers began extracting sediment cores from the Corriental Reservoir, one of Tikal's primary water storage systems. Layer by layer, these cores preserved a timeline centuries of environmental data compressed into bands of mineral and organic material. What scientists expected to find were natural sediments, clay, silt, traces of biological matter. What they found instead was something else entirely. Embedded within these layers were concentrated deposits of zeolite and quartz minerals, not typically associated with random geological accumulation in such contexts. Their presence was not only unusual, it was patterned. These materials appeared consistently within specific strata, suggesting deliberate placement rather than natural occurrence. This was the moment when the narrative shifted from passive adaptation to intentional engineering. Zeolite, in particular, is a material that carries profound implications. In modern science, it is classified as a microporous aluminosilicate mineral, valued for its ability to trap contaminants through ion exchange and adsorption. It is widely used today in water purification systems to remove heavy metals, toxins, and even radioactive elements. Its effectiveness lies in its internal structure, a lattice of microscopic channels capable of capturing harmful particles at a scale invisible to the human eye. Quartz, when processed into fine sand, complements this function by acting as a mechanical filter, physically removing suspended particles as water flows through it. Together, these materials form the backbone of filtration systems used in contemporary water treatment facilities. And yet, here they were integrated into a reservoir constructed over 2,000 years ago. The implications extend beyond mere coincidence. Geological surveys indicate that the nearest natural sources of zeolite are located dozens of kilometers away from Tikal. Transporting such material would have required coordinated effort, planning, and a clear understanding of its value. This was not incidental use. It was intentional selection. Men. The Maya did not simply gather stones. They chose specific minerals, moved them across challenging terrain, and incorporated them into a structured system. Subsequent excavations confirmed that this was not an isolated phenomenon. The arrangement of materials within the reservoir followed a clear logic. Water entering the system would first encounter coarser sediments, allowing larger debris to settle. It would then pass through finer layers of sand, and finally through zones enriched with zeolite and quartz before reaching the main storage basin. This sequence mirrors the principles of multi-stage filtration used in modern engineering, where different materials are layered to progressively remove contaminants of varying sizes and chemical properties. What is particularly striking is that this system operates without mechanical intervention. There are no pumps, no pressure systems, no artificial flow controls. It relies entirely on gravity and the intrinsic properties of the materials themselves. This is not just filtration. It is passive, sustainable engineering optimized for long-term use in a challenging environment. But the true test of any filtration system is not its design, but its effectiveness. Chemical analyses of sediment samples from Tikal's reservoirs have revealed elevated levels of mercury in several locations, likely introduced through the use of cinnabar, a mercury-based pigment widely employed in Maya ritual practices. Mercury contamination poses severe health risks, especially in confined water systems. However, the Corriental Reservoir consistently shows significantly lower concentrations of such contaminants compared to neighboring reservoirs lacking similar mineral compositions. This suggests that the filtration system was not merely theoretical, it actively reduced harmful substances in the water supply. To fully grasp the significance of this, it is necessary to place Tikal within a broader historical context. In ancient Rome, one of the most advanced civilizations of its time, water was transported over vast distances through aqueducts. Yet purification relied largely on sedimentation rather than filtration. In medieval Europe, access to clean drinking water remained a persistent challenge, contributing to widespread disease. Even as late as the 19th century, before the advent of modern sanitation systems, cities struggled to prevent waterborne epidemics. And yet, more than a millennium earlier, the Maya at Tikal appear to have developed a solution that aligns closely with modern water purification principles. Each layer of archaeological evidence adds depth to this paradox. Radiocarbon dating places the use of the Corriental filtration system as early as the late pre-classic period, around the first centuries before and after the Common Era. This is not a late innovation, it is deeply embedded in the city's developmental timeline. Furthermore, the consistency of mineral usage across different sediment layers suggests that this knowledge was maintained and transmitted over generations. The engineering challenges alone are substantial. Transporting tons of mineral material without the use of wheeled vehicles or large draft animals would have required significant human labor and organizational capacity. But beyond logistics lies a more complex question. How did the Maya identify these materials as effective filtration agents in the first place? Zeolite does not advertise its properties. Its filtering capability operates at a microscopic level, invisible to direct observation. It does not dramatically alter the appearance of water. Its effects are subtle, measurable only through long-term outcomes, reduced illness, improved water quality, sustained population health. Recognizing its value would have required either prolonged empirical observation or a form of knowledge that does not fit neatly into our current understanding of ancient science. Some researchers propose that the Maya may have observed natural springs where water passed through zeolite-rich rock and appeared cleaner or tasted different. Over time, such observations could have been refined into practical applications. Others suggest a gradual process of experimentation, testing different materials and retaining those that produced better results. These explanations are plausible, but they do not fully account for the precision, consistency, and scale of implementation observed at Tikal. Because this system is not experimental in appearance, it is optimized. It reflects a level of understanding that, while not formalized in written scientific theory, demonstrates a clear grasp of cause and effect. It suggests that knowledge can exist in forms that are systematic, transferable, and highly effective, even without the frameworks we associate with science today. This realization forces a reconsideration of how technological development is defined. The conventional narrative assumes a linear progression from primitive to advanced, from simple observation to complex theory. But the filtration system at Tikal complicates this model. It suggests that advanced solutions can emerge independently of formal scientific structures, and that such knowledge can be lost as easily as it is gained. If the Maya understood water filtration like this over 2,000 years ago, what else do you think they knew that we've lost? Where are you watching this video from, and what time of day is it for you? Share your location and time in the comments below. In ancient Egypt, water was not just observed, it was measured with a level of precision that should not exist for its time. Hidden within the vast expanse of the Karnak temple complex, far from the towering columns and colossal statues, lies a system of carved stone markings that once dictated the fate of an entire civilization. These are the Karnak nilometer marks, seemingly simple lines etched into stone, yet they represent one of the most sophisticated measurement systems of the ancient world. The existence of nilometers across Egypt has been known since the early explorations of scholars during the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly following the scientific surveys conducted during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign. However, the Karnak nilometer stands apart. Unlike standalone structures such as those found on Elephantine Island nilometer, the Karnak system appears embedded within a religious and administrative complex, suggesting that its role extended beyond mere observation. Early documentation recorded the presence of vertical shafts, stairways, and engraved calibration lines. But it was not until systematic archaeological work in the 20th century that the true precision of these markings began to be understood. As excavations expanded through the early and mid-20th century, archaeologists began documenting not just the presence of these markings, but their astonishing regularity. Detailed surveys revealed that the spacing between each engraved line corresponded closely to the ancient Egyptian unit, known as the cubit, approximately 52.3 centimeters. But what shocked researchers was not the existence of a unit system. It was the consistency across multiple segments of the structure. Measurements taken from preserved sections showed deviations of only a few millimeters over repeated intervals. In some cases, entire vertical sequences maintained near-perfect proportional spacing, despite centuries of erosion, sediment pressure, and structural shifting. To understand how extraordinary this is, consider the limitations of the ancient world. There were no laser levels, no calibrated steel rulers, no digital instruments capable of verifying vertical alignment. Even in modern construction, maintaining sub-centimeter accuracy across stone surfaces exposed to environmental stress requires controlled conditions, stable baselines, and repeated recalibration. Yet the Karnak nilometer achieved this in an open, water-exposed environment over 3,000 years ago. The stone surfaces were not only cut, they were standardized, suggesting that the builders were not simply carving marks, but executing a predefined measurement system with remarkable discipline. Comparative studies further amplify this mystery. When archaeologists examined other nilometers across Egypt, particularly at Elephantine, they found similar systems, but with subtle variations. The Elephantine nilometer, while highly functional, shows slightly greater inconsistencies in spacing and integration. By contrast, the Karnak markings appear more systematically embedded into a broader architectural plan. This raises the possibility that Karnak was not merely a measurement site, but a reference standard, a calibration hub from which other systems may have been derived or adjusted. Historical records reinforce this interpretation. Ancient Egyptian texts describe specific thresholds of water levels that directly influenced agricultural output. A rise of approximately 16 cubits was considered optimal, producing fertile floodwaters that enriched the soil without destroying crops. Below this level, famine became a real threat. Above it, catastrophic flooding could devastate entire regions. The nilometer at Karnak, therefore, was not simply measuring water, it was defining survival parameters for millions of people. Each archaeological campaign added new layers of understanding. Inscriptions discovered near certain measurement lines appear to mark critical thresholds, possibly indicating economic or ritual significance. These markings suggest that the nilometer functioned as more than a passive tool. It was an active instrument in governance. Taxation levels, grain storage decisions, and labor allocation may have been adjusted based on the readings taken from these very lines. In effect, the nilometer operated as a predictive system, an ancient analog database where environmental data was translated directly into economic policy. But this leads to an even deeper question. How was such a system calibrated in the first place? The Nile River is one of the most complex river systems in the world. Its flooding depends on rainfall patterns thousands of kilometers away, particularly in the Ethiopian highlands. These patterns are influenced by climatic variables that even modern science struggles to model with complete accuracy. Without long-distance communication, without meteorological instruments, and without centralized data networks, how did ancient engineers determine that 16 cubits was the precise threshold for agricultural success? One explanation is long-term observation data, accumulated over generations, refined through experience. But this raises logistical challenges. Maintaining consistent measurement standards across centuries would require stable units, reliable replication methods, and a governing authority capable of enforcing uniformity across vast distances. It would also require accurate record keeping, yet much of the detailed methodology behind these calibrations has not survived. The mystery deepens when we consider the connection between the nilometer and the sky. The annual flooding of the Nile closely coincided with the heliacal rising of Sirius, known in ancient Egypt as Sothis. This event marked the beginning of the Egyptian New Year and was central to their calendar system. Some researchers propose that the nilometer markings may have been calibrated in alignment with this astronomical cycle, effectively synchronizing terrestrial water levels with celestial observations. If true, this would imply a sophisticated integration of astronomy and hydrology, an interdisciplinary system that predates modern scientific frameworks. Modern technology has allowed researchers to revisit the Karnak nilometer with new tools. Laser scanning and digital modeling have confirmed what earlier archaeologists suspected. The intervals are not only consistent, but intentionally precise. When compared to measurement systems in Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley, the Karnak nilometer stands out for its physical durability and precision. In Mesopotamia, measurements were often recorded on clay tablets, flexible, portable, but vulnerable to damage. At Karnak, the data was carved into stone, creating a permanent, tamper-resistant record. Material analysis offers additional clues, but few definitive answers. The carvings were likely made using copper or bronze tools, yet achieving such uniform depth and spacing across hard stone surfaces would have required exceptional control. Some researchers suggest the use of measuring rods or templates, but no such tools have been definitively linked to the nilometer system. The durability of the markings remaining legible after millennia of water exposure indicates that the builders were not only concerned with accuracy, but with longevity. And this is where the mystery reaches its peak. The Karnak nilometer was not an isolated innovation. It was part of a broader system, one that connected environmental observation, economic management, and religious authority. Located within a sacred temple complex, the act of measuring water may have carried ritual significance, reinforcing the idea that the Nile's behavior was both a natural and divine phenomenon. Priests and officials who interpreted these measurements were not just technicians, they were intermediaries between the physical world and the cosmic order. Despite decades of study, critical questions remain unresolved. How were the original reference points established with such precision? How was this precision maintained across generations without measurable drift? And what techniques allowed ancient engineers to achieve millimeter-level consistency on stone surfaces exposed to dynamic environmental conditions? Do you think the ancient Egyptians achieved this level of precision purely through natural observation? Or was there a technology we still don't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Built from nothing but stone and precision, rising in perfect silence. For over 3,000 years, this dome has no mortar, no metal, no hidden support, and yet it has never collapsed. Deep within the ancient citadel of Mycenae, the structure known as the treasury of Atreus challenges one of the most fundamental assumptions about early engineering, that complexity follows technology. Because here, long before classical Greek mathematics, before formal physics, before cranes or concrete, a civilization constructed a dome so precise that even modern engineers paused to understand how it was possible. The site first drew systematic attention in the 19th century, when early archaeologists such as Heinrich Schliemann began excavations in Mycenae during the 1870s. While Schliemann is best known for uncovering the royal shaft graves, it was the monumental Tholos tombs nearby that presented a different kind of mystery. Unlike the burial shafts, the treasury of Atreus was not hidden underground in fragments. It was intact, monumental, and structurally complete. Later, more methodical excavations led by Christos Tsauntas in the late 19th century refined the understanding of the site, dating the tomb to approximately 1250 BCE, during the height of Mycenaean power. The structure consists of a long entrance passage, or dromos, measuring roughly 36 meters in length, leading to a circular chamber over 13 meters high and nearly 15 meters in diameter. These numbers alone place it among the largest self-supporting stone domes in the world until the Roman era constructed more than 1,000 years later. From the earliest excavation reports, archaeologists noted something unusual. The interior surface of the dome was once finely dressed, with stones carefully smoothed to create a continuous curve, almost as if the chamber had been carved from a single mass. Yet closer inspection revealed the truth. Hundreds of individual stone blocks, each shaped and positioned with astonishing accuracy. Excavations throughout the 20th century confirmed that no mortar existed between these stones. Not a trace of binding material was found. The stability of the entire structure depends solely on the precise geometry of each block and the friction between them. What astonished early researchers was not simply the size, but the method. The dome is built using a corbelling technique, in which each successive ring of stone slightly overhangs the one below, gradually closing inward until the apex is sealed. This method is known in various ancient cultures, but nowhere is it executed with this level of scale and precision without mortar. Each block, some weighing several tons, was cut and placed so precisely that friction and gravity alone hold the entire structure in equilibrium. There is no binding material, no adhesive, no internal reinforcement. And yet, the dome has survived seismic activity, weathering, and millennia of structural stress. Later structural studies conducted in the 20th century, including detailed surveys by Greek and international teams, attempted to measure the tolerance of the stone placements. The results were striking. Variations between layers were often within a margin of mere millimeters. In modern construction, such tolerances are achieved using laser-guided instruments and standardized tools. In contrast, the Mycenaeans worked with bronze tools, rope, and manual measurement systems. Despite these limitations, the dome maintains a near-perfect radial symmetry, suggesting that the builders possessed a highly refined system of spatial control, one that has not been preserved in written form. Modern structural analysis reveals that even a deviation of a few millimeters in the placement angle of each stone layer could have led to progressive instability. In corbel domes, the center of mass must remain perfectly aligned inward to prevent outward collapse. This requires not only consistent angular measurement, but also predictive understanding of how cumulative weight behaves across layers. Yet there is no evidence that the Mycenaeans possessed formalized geometry or written engineering theory at this time. Unlike later Greek mathematicians such as Euclid, whose works systematized geometric principles centuries later, the builders of this tomb left no technical texts explaining their methods. The knowledge appears to have been practical, intuitive, or perhaps transmitted through a now-lost tradition. Excavations inside the chamber revealed something equally telling. Archaeologists uncovered fragments indicating that the interior was once decorated with bronze rosettes and possibly colored stone facings. These decorative elements were attached to the stone surface, suggesting that the builders first completed a structurally perfect shell before adding aesthetic layers. This sequence implies a clear separation between engineering and decoration, reinforcing the idea that the structural design itself was the primary achievement. Comparative analysis with other Mycenaean tholos tombs, including those at Orchomenos and Tiryns, reveals similar construction techniques but with notable differences in scale and execution. None match the precision or size of the treasury of Atreus. This has led some researchers to conclude that it represents a peak in Mycenaean architectural capability, a moment where accumulated knowledge, labor organization, and craftsmanship converged to produce something unparalleled within its cultural context. Perhaps the most striking comparison comes from much later periods. The Pantheon, built in the 2nd century CE, is often cited as one of the greatest domed structures in history. It uses concrete, a revolutionary material that allows for continuous mass and internal cohesion. By contrast, the Mycenaean dome achieves stability through discrete stone elements alone. No continuous material binds it. And yet, for over a millennium, No structure surpassed it in span using purely stone-based corbelling. This raises a fundamental question. How did a Bronze Age society, with limited tools and no advanced materials, achieve a level of precision that would not be equaled until the development of entirely new construction technologies? Further excavations around the entrance revealed the massive lintel stone above the doorway, estimated to weigh over 120 tons. Above it sits a relieving triangle, an empty space designed to redirect the immense weight of the structure away from the lintel. Archaeological analysis shows that this triangular void significantly reduces the vertical load applied to the lintel, preventing structural failure. This feature demonstrates an understanding of load distribution that aligns closely with modern engineering principles. Without this triangular opening, the downward force could have fractured the lintel over time. The presence of such a feature suggests that the builders were not only capable of constructing massive forms, but also of anticipating long-term structural stress. Despite decades of research, key questions remain unanswered. No definitive evidence has been found to explain how the stones were transported from quarry to site. The surrounding terrain is rugged, and while theories involving sledges, rollers, and human labor have been proposed, none fully account for the scale and precision required. Likewise, there is no surviving documentation describing construction methods, planning processes, or measurement systems. The knowledge required to build the dome appears to have vanished along with the civilization that created it. Some researchers argue that the builders relied on empirical methods, refining their techniques through repeated construction over generations. Others suggest that the apparent complexity may emerge from relatively simple principles applied with extreme consistency and skill. However, both explanations leave gaps. The level of coordination required to produce such a structure implies centralized planning, standardized techniques, and a deep understanding of materials. Yet the archaeological record offers only fragments of this process. What do you think the Mycenaeans truly understood about engineering that we still cannot fully explain today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A monument rises from the summit of Mount Nemrut that was never meant to be easily understood. Massive stone heads, some weighing several tons, sit scattered as if time itself had broken them apart. Yet nothing here is random. This is not ruin, it is design. Every stone, every terrace, every direction carries intention, calculation, and a level of planning that continues to challenge modern interpretation. Built in the 1st century BCE by Antiochus I Theos of Commagene in southeastern Turkey, this mountaintop complex was conceived as both a royal tomb and a cosmic statement, a place where a king could elevate himself into the realm of gods. But what remains today suggests something far more complex. It raises a question that has not been fully answered. Was this merely symbolic architecture, or a precisely engineered system designed to align with the movements of the sky itself? For nearly 2,000 years, the site remained hidden in isolation, exposed only to wind, snow, and time. It was not until 1881 that German engineer Carl Sester, while surveying the region, encountered something unexpected at the summit. What he found defied conventional understanding of ancient construction. Colossal statues arranged in symmetrical formations, inscriptions written in Greek, and a massive artificial mound constructed from millions of loose stones. This was not a natural formation. It was intentional, monumental, and unlike anything else known from the Hellenistic world. In the decades that followed, systematic expeditions began to uncover more of its structure. Among the most significant were those led by Friedrich Karl Dörner, whose detailed surveys revealed a carefully planned architectural layout. 2 primary terraces east and west stood in deliberate opposition, mirroring each other in both form and meaning. This symmetry was not decorative. It was structural, mathematical, and deeply embedded into the design logic of the entire complex. Archaeological investigations throughout the 20th century brought forward increasingly precise data. The statues, now fragmented into separate heads and bodies due to centuries of seismic activity, were originally between 8 and 10 meters tall. Each was carved from massive limestone blocks that had to be transported to an elevation exceeding 2,100 meters, across terrain that even today presents logistical challenges. Behind these statues rises a tumulus, approximately 50 meters in height and nearly 150 meters in diameter, composed of millions of fist-sized stones deliberately piled to form a massive artificial mound. This structure is believed to conceal the burial chamber of Antiochus himself. Yet despite multiple attempts using both traditional excavation and modern imaging technologies, the chamber has never been successfully accessed. The loose stones shift under pressure, collapsing inward and preventing any stable penetration. This is not a flaw in construction, it appears to be an intentional defensive mechanism, an ancient method of ensuring that the tomb remains permanently sealed. The inscriptions found across the site provide further context, describing Antiochus's claim of divine ancestry and his deliberate fusion of Greek and Persian religious traditions. The gods represented in the statues, Zeus, Apollo, Heracles, are depicted alongside the king himself, suggesting not just reverence, but equality. This ideological message is reinforced through architecture, but when compared to other major Hellenistic centers such as Pergamon or Delphi, the differences become impossible to ignore. Those sites, though sophisticated, were constructed within accessible environments and do not exhibit the same level of isolation, altitude, or structural defiance. Nemrut stands alone, both geographically and conceptually. It is within the orientation of the terraces that the most compelling mystery begins to emerge. The east terrace is positioned to face the exact point of sunrise, while the west terrace aligns with the setting sun. This dual-axis configuration effectively frames the daily solar cycle, capturing both the beginning and the end of daylight within a single architectural system. At first, this might be interpreted as symbolic, a reflection of life and death, beginning and ending, but precise measurements suggest that the alignment goes far beyond simple metaphor. Modern studies have demonstrated that the axes of these terraces correspond closely with the sun's path during key seasonal events, particularly near the summer solstice. The degree of accuracy is striking, especially when considering the absence of advanced instruments in the 1st century BCE. The deviation from true solar alignment is minimal, far smaller than what would typically result from unaided observation. Even more intriguing is the possibility that the builders incorporated stellar alignment into the design. Archaeoastronomical research has proposed a connection between the layout of the terraces and the rising position of the star Regulus, located in the constellation Leo. In antiquity, Regulus was strongly associated with kingship and divine authority, often referred to as the king star. Around the time of Antiochus' reign, its position on the horizon would have corresponded with specific sightlines from the terraces of Nemrut. If this alignment was intentional, it suggests that the monument was designed not only to track the movement of the sun, but also to synchronize with the stars, embedding celestial symbolism directly into its architecture. This introduces a layered system of meaning and function. Solar alignment marking the passage of time, stellar alignment reinforcing royal divinity, and architectural symmetry binding both into a unified expression of cosmic order. Yet this interpretation leads to an unavoidable problem. There are no surviving tools, no recorded calculations, and no written explanations describing how such precision was achieved. The level of accuracy observed today challenges assumptions about the technological limitations of the period. When compared to the pyramids of Egypt, which demonstrate remarkable cardinal alignment, or Stonehenge, which tracks solar events at ground level, Nemrut presents a far more complex scenario. It combines extreme altitude, unstable terrain, large-scale stone construction, and dual-axis celestial orientation into a single system that should have been extraordinarily difficult to execute. Beyond the astronomical questions, the engineering challenges alone remain unresolved. Transporting multi-ton stone blocks to such heights would have required coordinated labor, advanced planning, and logistical systems that leave little trace in the archaeological record. The uniformity of the statues suggests a standardized production process, yet no workshops or tool remains have been definitively identified. The tumulus itself, acting as both a protective barrier and an unsolved puzzle, continues to resist modern investigation. Ground-penetrating radar and other imaging techniques have produced inconclusive results, reinforcing the idea that the structure was intentionally designed to conceal and protect whatever lies within. Today, Mount Nemrut remains one of the most enigmatic monuments of the ancient world, defined not by its size, but by its complexity. It merges religion, power, engineering, and astronomy into a design that still resists full explanation. Standing at the summit, as sunlight moves across the silent stone faces, one truth becomes clear. This place was built to align with the sky, with time, and with something beyond human understanding. If these alignments were intentional, then the real question is not whether ancient builders understood the heavens, but how far that understanding truly went. Do you think the astronomical alignments at Mount Nemrut are merely a coincidence, or evidence of ancient knowledge far beyond what we understand today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Built with materials that should fail, assembled without tools that should be required, and yet precise in ways that seem almost impossible, the rope bridges of the Inca civilization defy the most basic expectations of engineering. High in the Andes, where wind cuts through stone and valleys plunge hundreds of meters into shadow, these structures stretch across vast chasms with no steel, no stone arches, and no metal fastenings. Only grass twisted, braided, and suspended across impossible distances. And yet, for centuries, these bridges carried people, animals, and entire networks of communication across one of the harshest terrains on Earth. This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of a material so weak it should fail, yet when transformed through a precise and repeatable process, behaves with a reliability that echoes modern engineered systems, raising a deeper question about whether ancient builders truly lacked theory or simply understood the world through a different, equally powerful framework. Unlike most ancient structures, Inca rope bridges were not rediscovered as ruins buried under centuries of sediment. They never disappeared, and that continuity alone changes how archaeologists interpret them. The most famous surviving example, the Huachuca Bridge, still spans a canyon over the Apurimac River, hanging at a height that would make even modern engineers cautious without safety systems. Spanish chroniclers in the 16th century, including early colonial observers, described entire networks of such bridges integrated into the Quapac Ñan, a road system stretching over 40,000 kilometers across South America, connecting mountains, jungles, and deserts. These accounts were once thought exaggerated, yet modern surveys have confirmed the scale of this network, with thousands of kilometers still traceable today. In the 20th century, anthropologists and engineers began systematic documentation of these bridges, expecting to find primitive approximations of suspension design. Instead, they found a living tradition, preserved not in texts or blueprints but in ritual cycles of reconstruction, where knowledge is transmitted through action rather than written language, creating a continuity of technique that has survived for centuries without formal documentation. At the core of every Inca rope bridge lies ichu grass, a high-altitude plant adapted to the harsh conditions of the Andes, where temperature fluctuations, strong winds, and low oxygen levels define the environment. Individually, each strand of this grass is weak, brittle, and biologically unstable, degrading quickly under moisture and stress. From the perspective of modern engineering, it is the exact type of material that should never be used for structural load-bearing purposes. However, when thousands of these fibers are twisted together, a transformation occurs that challenges basic assumptions about material strength. The fibers are first braided into thin cords, then those cords are twisted into thicker ropes, and finally, multiple ropes are combined into massive load-bearing cables that can reach diameters exceeding 30 centimeters. These cables form the primary structural elements of the bridge, carrying tension across the span in a way that mirrors the principles used in modern steel suspension systems. Experimental reconstructions and load tests have demonstrated that a single cable can support several tons, while the complete bridge can safely carry multiple individuals simultaneously, distributing weight dynamically across its structure. What makes this even more remarkable is the absence of theoretical frameworks typically required to achieve such optimization. The Inca civilization had no formal written mathematics describing tensile strength, no recorded equations for load distribution, and no evidence of abstract engineering models. Yet the structure of their cables reflects principles that modern material science identifies as optimal, including redundancy, flexibility, and energy absorption. Unlike rigid materials such as stone or metal, which can fail catastrophically when stress exceeds limits, the braided fiber system dissipates energy through movement, allowing the bridge to flex under load and return to equilibrium. This dynamic response reduces stress concentration and extends the functional lifespan of the structure, even under variable environmental conditions such as strong winds or uneven loads. In essence, the bridge behaves not as a static object, but as a responsive system adapting continuously to the forces acting upon it. Archaeological investigations along the Inca road network have revealed further layers of sophistication. Anchoring systems carved directly into bedrock have been found at multiple bridge sites, consisting of grooves, channels, and shaped surfaces designed to secure the main cables. These features are not randomly placed. They align with the direction of force vectors, ensuring that tension is transferred efficiently into the surrounding rock. Measurements taken at these sites show consistent spacing and positioning, suggesting a standardized approach to anchoring despite the absence of written plans. In rare cases where ancient fiber remnants have survived in dry environments, microscopic analysis has uncovered complex twisting patterns with consistent orientation, indicating deliberate design rather than improvisation. When compared with other ancient engineering traditions, the uniqueness of the Inca approach becomes clear. The Roman civilization achieved durability through compression, using stone arches and concrete to channel forces downward. Early suspension bridges in China introduced tension-based designs, but relied on wood, chains, or later metal reinforcements. In contrast, the Inca created a purely organic system, relying entirely on renewable plant fibers to achieve a level of structural performance that remains difficult to replicate without modern tools. Each year, the Tiwanaku Bridge is rebuilt in a process that has changed little over centuries, offering a rare opportunity to observe ancient engineering in action. The reconstruction begins with the harvesting of ichu grass, which is dried and prepared before being twisted into cords by hand. These cords are then braided into thicker ropes, which are combined into the main cables that span the canyon. Teams of workers coordinate to stretch these cables across the gap, anchoring them securely into the stone foundations. Once the primary structure is in place, the bridge deck and side supports are woven, creating a functional pathway that can be used immediately upon completion. The entire process typically takes 3 to 4 days and involves dozens of participants, each contributing to a specific stage of construction. What stands out to modern observers is the absence of measurement tools or calculation devices. There are no rulers to ensure equal lengths, no instruments to measure tension, and no written instructions guiding the process. Yet the finished bridge consistently exhibits balance, symmetry, and structural integrity, suggesting that precision can be achieved through methods other than formal measurement, relying instead on accumulated experience and collective memory. Despite extensive study, key questions remain unresolved. Developing such an efficient system would normally require repeated failure, yet large-scale collapse would have been too dangerous to allow uncontrolled experimentation. This suggests the knowledge was either refined gradually with minimal risk, or discovered early and preserved with remarkable accuracy. The striking similarity between Inca braiding techniques and optimal modern designs is also difficult to explain by chance alone. Moreover, this knowledge spread across vast regions without written language, implying an unusually effective system of cultural transmission. Together, these factors challenge the idea that advanced engineering must rely on formal theory. In your opinion, is this proof of an underestimated form of ancient intelligence, or have we simply not yet understood how they achieved it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the dry landscape of Rajasthan stands a structure where geometry seems to defy time itself, a construction so precise, so relentlessly repetitive, that it feels less like architecture and more like a mathematical equation carved into stone. From above, Baori appears almost unreal, thousands of perfectly aligned steps forming a hypnotic lattice of triangles, repeating with such consistency that even modern eyes struggle to process it. This is not a digital render, nor a product of modern engineering. It is over 1,000 years old, and no one knows exactly how it was calculated. The first documented encounters by modern observers trace back to British colonial surveys in the 19th century, when engineers and antiquarians began cataloguing unusual structures across Rajasthan. Baori, located in the village of Abhaneri, immediately stood out, not because it was merely large, but because it was geometrically overwhelming. Early reports described a structure plunging roughly 20 meters into the earth, lined with an astonishing network of steps, estimated at more than 3,500. Yet what truly captured attention was not its scale, but its precision. Surveyors using basic measuring rods and angular estimations recorded something deeply unexpected. The alignment of the steps remained consistent across multiple levels, with deviations so small they were difficult to quantify using the tools available at the time. For a structure believed to date back to around the 8th or 9th century, this observation alone raised a fundamental and unsettling question. How could such accuracy exist without advanced systems of calculation? As archaeological investigations intensified throughout the 20th century, the mystery only deepened. Excavations and structural studies revealed that Baori was not the result of a single construction event, but rather a project developed over extended periods, possibly across generations of builders. Stratigraphic analysis of the stone layers indicated variations in masonry techniques, suggesting multiple phases of expansion or refinement. In most ancient constructions, such long-term development introduces inconsistencies, subtle shifts in alignment, irregular spacing, or visible corrections in geometry. Yet at Baori, the opposite pattern emerged. The upper tiers, widely believed to be later additions, exhibited even greater geometric clarity and tighter alignment than the lower sections. Measurements taken during late 20th century surveys using more advanced instruments suggested that the angular repetition of the step patterns remained remarkably uniform, with discrepancies often falling below a few millimeters across spans of several meters. This was not just consistency, it was controlled precision, sustained across time. Comparative analysis with other stepwells across India further highlights the anomaly. Structures such as Rani Ki Vav in Gujarat or Agrasen Ki Baoli in Delhi demonstrate impressive symmetry and engineering skill, yet their designs rely on broader spatial organization rather than dense geometric repetition. Chand Baori is different. Its steps form a compressed, interlocking matrix, each triangular unit repeating with near-perfect uniformity, cascading across 13 levels like a visual algorithm. Modern architectural assessments suggest that maintaining this level of repetition without cumulative error would be extremely challenging, even with contemporary tools. If each step deviated by even a single millimeter, the accumulated distortion across thousands of steps would become visibly apparent. And yet, such distortion does not appear. The structure holds its geometry with an almost unnatural stability. Excavations have also revealed that this precision was not purely aesthetic. Chand Baori functioned as a sophisticated water management system in a region defined by extreme seasonal variation. The descending terraces allowed access to water as levels fluctuated throughout the year, while the geometric configuration contributed to the structural integrity of the entire complex. The zigzag arrangement of steps breaks up linear stress distribution, reducing the likelihood of wall collapse under pressure. Geological surveys of the surrounding soil indicate centuries of environmental stress, thermal expansion, moisture variation, and ground movement, yet the core structure remains intact. This suggests that the builders were not only concerned with form, but with long-term stability, integrating geometry and physics in a way that appears remarkably advanced. But beyond function and form lies the most profound mystery of all, the question of calculation. To conceive and execute a structure like Chand Baori, its builders would have required a system capable of maintaining consistent angles, distances, and proportions across both horizontal and vertical dimensions. This is not a matter of simple craftsmanship. It is a problem of controlled repetition under constraint, a challenge that in modern terms would require mathematical modeling. And yet, no such models have been found. There are no surviving blueprints, no inscriptions detailing measurement systems, no instruments that could reliably produce the observed level of precision. This leads to the central question: how did they calculate it? One possibility is the use of large-scale templates, physical guides constructed to standardize each segment of the pattern. Such templates could, in theory, be replicated across the structure, ensuring uniformity. However, this method introduces its own complications. Over time, even the smallest imperfections in a template would propagate through the structure, creating visible inconsistencies. The fact that Chand Baori shows no such accumulation suggests either an extraordinary level of control in template production or the use of a different system entirely. Another hypothesis proposes a grid-based planning approach in which the entire site was mapped using proportional divisions derived from fixed reference points. Builders could have used ropes, stakes, and weighted lines to establish a geometric framework, subdividing space into repeatable units. While this method is plausible and has been observed in other ancient constructions, it struggles to explain the sustained precision across varying elevations. Maintaining a perfect grid on a flat plane is one challenge. Extending that grid downward into a deep, multi-level excavation without distortion is something else entirely. A more intriguing theory suggests an iterative process guided by continuous feedback. In this model, each layer of construction would be measured and adjusted relative to the previous one, allowing for gradual refinement of the pattern. This could explain why the upper tiers appear more precise. They may represent the culmination of a long process of optimization. But even this explanation raises difficult questions. Such a method would require an extraordinary level of spatial awareness and error detection, implying that the builders possessed not only skill, but an intuitive grasp of geometric relationships that borders on mathematical reasoning. Modern engineers attempting to digitally reconstruct Chand-Baori's geometry encounter a revealing limitation. When the structure is modeled computationally, precise parameters must be defined in advance angles, distances, repetition intervals. Without these exact values, the model quickly diverges, losing symmetry and coherence. In other words, the structure behaves like the solution to a complex equation, but the equation itself is missing. This is where the mystery becomes truly unsettling. If the builders of Chand-Baori did not rely on written mathematics or advanced instruments, then their method of calculation must have existed in a different form, perhaps embedded in practice rather than theory, transmitted through experience rather than documentation. A kind of applied geometry that functioned with the reliability of mathematics, but without its formal language. A system that could produce precision without leaving behind a record of how that precision was achieved. In your opinion, how did ancient builders calculate Chand-Baori through a lost mathematical system, or a method we have yet to understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Standing in silence for over 5,000 years, Newgrange reveals a level of precision that feels fundamentally out of place in its own time. Hidden within the vast prehistoric landscape of Bruneboyne, this enormous circular mound of stone and earth predates the pyramids of Giza by nearly 5 centuries and was already ancient when Stonehenge was first erected. And yet, despite its age, despite the absence of metal tools, writing systems, or formal mathematics, it performs an astronomical event so precise that modern engineers would approach it with digital modeling, simulation, and repeated calibration. The phenomenon occurs during the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. At dawn, when the sun rises at its lowest and most extreme point along the horizon, something extraordinary begins to unfold. The first rays of sunlight do not enter through the main doorway, as intuition would suggest. Instead, they pass through a narrow, carefully constructed opening positioned directly above it, the roof box. This aperture, only a few centimeters high, captures the light at an exact angle and directs it inward along a passage stretching approximately 19 meters into the heart of the structure. Over the course of roughly 17 minutes, the beam travels slowly across the stone floor, climbing toward the back chamber until it fully illuminates the central space. Then, just as precisely as it appeared, it fades back into darkness. This is not a symbolic alignment. It is not an approximation. It is a controlled optical event. The margin for error is almost incomprehensibly small. A misalignment of even a fraction of a degree in the passage orientation, a slight miscalculation in the height or angle of the roof box, or a misunderstanding of the Earth's axial tilt, approximately 23.5 degrees, would prevent the light from reaching the chamber entirely. And yet, for over 5 millennia, the effect has persisted. The beam arrives within a narrow window of days surrounding the solstice, maintaining a consistency that suggests deliberate and highly accurate design. The recognition of this mechanism did not come easily. Although the mound itself had been known and partially explored for centuries, its true function remained hidden until the 20th century. In 1962, systematic excavations began under the direction of Michael J. O'Kelly. Over the next several years, his team carefully removed accumulated debris, mapped the interior passage, and restored structural elements that had collapsed or shifted over time. Then, in December 1967, O'Kelly positioned himself inside the chamber at dawn on the day of the winter solstice. What he witnessed would redefine the entire site. As the sun rose, a narrow beam of light entered through the roof box and travelled deep into the passage, illuminating the chamber exactly as predicted. It was not a coincidence. It was proof. Subsequent excavations reinforced this conclusion. The roof box was not an accidental gap or later modification. It was a deliberate architectural feature, constructed using massive stone slabs placed with extraordinary care. Its dimensions were not arbitrary. Its angle was not approximate. It functioned as a precise filter, allowing sunlight to enter only under highly specific conditions, effectively blocking it for the remaining 360-plus days of the year. When compared to other ancient structures, the uniqueness of this system becomes even more apparent. Stonehenge, for example, aligns with the solstice sunrise and sunset, but does so through large-scale positioning of standing stones across an open landscape. The pyramids of Giza demonstrate remarkable alignment with the cardinal directions, achieving near-perfect orientation toward true north, but they do not channel light into internal chambers in response to solar events. In Mesoamerica, structures like the Pyramid of El Castillo create dramatic visual effects during equinoxes through the interplay of light and shadow, producing the illusion of a descending serpent. Yet even these rely on external projection, not internal precision. Newgrange stands apart. It does not simply mark the sun's position, it captures, guides, and delivers it. Modern measurements have confirmed the extraordinary accuracy of the structure. Laser surveys and astronomical modeling indicate that the passage is aligned with the rising sun at the winter solstice with an error margin of less than half a degree. In practical terms, this means that the builders achieved a level of directional precision comparable to modern surveying techniques, using only observational methods and stone tools. To reach such accuracy would require years, possibly generations, of careful monitoring of the horizon, tracking the sun's movement across seasons, and identifying the exact point at which it rises at its lowest annual position. Yet there is no physical evidence of such observational systems. No markers have been found that definitively map long-term solar tracking. No instruments survive that could explain how these measurements were taken or recorded. The knowledge appears embedded entirely within the architecture itself. Excavations inside the chamber have revealed additional layers of complexity. The roof is constructed using a corbelled system, in which successive layers of stone are placed slightly inward until they meet at the top, forming a stable, self-supporting dome. This technique eliminates the need for mortar or central supports, distributing weight outward and downward. Remarkably, despite thousands of years of exposure to Ireland's wet climate, the chamber remains largely dry. The stones are angled and positioned to direct water away from the interior, creating a natural drainage system that continues to function after 5,000 years. Artifacts discovered within the chamber provide insight into the cultural significance of the site, but little explanation of its technical achievement. Cremated human remains, along with beads, pendants, and decorated stones, carved with spirals and geometric patterns, suggest ritual or ceremonial use. The famous triple spiral motif found on one of the stones has been interpreted as a symbolic representation of cycles, life, death, and rebirth, possibly linked to the solar event itself. But symbolism alone cannot account for the precision of the light mechanism. The deeper question remains unresolved. How did a Neolithic society, without written mathematics or advanced tools, design and construct a system that requires such exact alignment? Predicting the winter solstice sunrise is not a simple task. It demands an understanding of long-term solar cycles and the ability to identify patterns over extended periods of time. Even a small observational error could accumulate, leading to misalignment. And yet, Newgrange does not drift. It does not fail. It continues to perform as intended. Some researchers argue that the knowledge was accumulated gradually, passed down through oral tradition and refined over generations. Others suggest that simple tools, such as aligned posts or sighting stones, could have been used to track solar movement with surprising accuracy. These explanations are plausible, but they do not fully resolve the issue of scale and precision. Aligning a structure to the sun is one challenge. Designing a narrow aperture that captures and directs light through a confined space with near zero tolerance for error is another entirely. There is also ongoing debate regarding the extent to which the current structure reflects its original form. O'Kelly's reconstruction efforts in the 20th century included the repositioning of stones at the entrance, leading some critics to question whether the roof box alignment might have been subtly altered. However, repeated observations over decades, combined with structural analysis, strongly support the conclusion that the phenomenon is authentic and deeply rooted in the original design. How do you think ancient people achieved this level of precision, lost knowledge, or something we still don't understand? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The surface looks too perfect to be ancient, not worn into randomness, not shaped by the uneven rhythm of human hands, but ordered, controlled almost as if it were calculated before it was carved. Rising abruptly from a sheer rock face in the highlands of Phrygia, the Midas monument does not behave like a relic. It behaves like a design, one imposed onto stone with a level of geometric discipline that feels disturbingly modern. And yet, it was created more than 2,700 years ago, long before any known system of precision engineering should have made such control possible. The story of its rediscovery begins in the 19th century, when European explorers and early archaeologists began systematically documenting the ruins scattered across central Anatolia. Unlike buried cities or collapsed temples, this structure did not need excavation to reveal itself. It stood exposed, cut directly into living rock at Yazilikaya, the inscribed rock, a place already marked by ancient carvings. Early surveys recorded its scale, approximately 17 meters high and 16 meters wide, but those numbers alone failed to capture what made it extraordinary. This was not a structure assembled piece by piece. It was a structure revealed by removal carved away from the mountain itself until only a patterned facade remained. And that difference is critical. Construction allows for adjustment. Carving does not forgive error. As more detailed studies followed through the late 19th and 20th centuries, particularly by German and Turkish archaeological teams, measurements began to accumulate with increasing precision. What emerged from those measurements was not simply craftsmanship, but something far more unsettling. The entire facade is covered in a repeating geometric system, rectangular motifs arranged in a continuous grid that spans nearly the entire vertical surface. At first glance, it appears decorative, but when measured, it reveals a level of consistency that challenges conventional explanations. Across multiple surveyed sections, the spacing between parallel lines deviates by only a few millimeters. Horizontal bands maintain near-perfect alignment over distances exceeding 10 meters. Angles that should gradually drift under manual carving remain consistently close to 90 degrees. In modern stoneworking, achieving that level of accuracy across such a large vertical surface requires calibrated tools, guides, and repeated verification. Without them, small errors accumulate rapidly, compounding into visible distortion. Yet here, that distortion is almost entirely absent. This is the core of the mystery. Geometry that should not hold, but does. To grasp the scale of this anomaly, comparisons are essential. In ancient Egypt, grid systems were indeed used to proportion human figures on walls, but these were typically painted guidelines, not deeply carved patterns extending across monumental rock surfaces. At sites like Newgrange, precision manifests in astronomical alignment, light entering a chamber at a specific moment of the year, but not in continuous geometric repetition across a vertical plane. Even Roman engineering, with tools like the groma and chorobates, focused on surveying and construction, not on maintaining decorative symmetry carved directly into stone at this scale. And yet, here in Phrygia, centuries before Roman standardization, a facade exists that behaves as though it was executed using a system of measurement we do not fully understand. The material only deepens the paradox. The monument is carved into volcanic tuff, a relatively soft and workable stone. On paper, this should make carving easier. But softness introduces instability. Edges chip, surfaces erode. Maintaining sharp, consistent lines across such a large area requires not just skill, but extraordinary control over force and repetition. Microscopic analysis of tool marks suggests deliberate incision rather than crude removal lines, cut, revisited, and refined with repeated passes, as if the artisans were following an invisible guide. But precision implies reference, and reference implies a system. No clear evidence of that system remains. There are no surviving guidelines etched beneath the surface, no anchor points, no templates preserved in the archaeological record. If the builders used string grids, measuring rods, or framing devices, those tools have vanished. Yet the finished result behaves as if such a system must have existed, because without it, the mathematics of error becomes unavoidable. A deviation of even a single degree, repeated over meters of vertical carving, would result in visible misalignment. Here, that misalignment is nearly non-existent. At the center of the facade lies another layer of enigma, a rectangular recess resembling a door. It is framed carefully, integrated into the geometric system, and positioned to command attention. But it is not functional. It does not open. It leads nowhere. Archaeologists refer to it as a false door, a concept known from Egyptian tomb architecture, where such features symbolize passage between the living and the dead. But in Egypt, false doors are internal, ritual elements. Here, the door is external, embedded in a facade that seems governed as much by geometry as by symbolism, which raises a more unsettling possibility. What if the geometry is not merely decorative around the door, but the door itself is a marker within a larger geometric language we no longer understand? Excavations and surveys in the surrounding area have added fragments of context without resolving the central mystery. Inscriptions in the Phrygian language, still only partially deciphered, appear near the upper sections of the monument. One of them references a figure associated with Midas, though whether this refers to a historical ruler or the mythologized king of Greek tradition remains uncertain. The inscription does not describe the construction process. It does not explain the purpose. It simply confirms that the monument was significant enough to be named, but not explained. Additional rock-cut monuments across the Yazilikaya Plateau suggest that this facade was not an isolated creation. Simpler versions exist less precise, less extensive, almost like earlier attempts or later imitations. None, however, reach the same level of geometric intensity. This implies a technological or conceptual peak, a moment when the necessary knowledge existed, was applied with extraordinary discipline, and then disappeared. Dating evidence places the monument in the late 8th century BCE, based on stylistic analysis and associated archaeological material. This period predates many of the standardized measurement systems we associate with precision engineering. It belongs to a time when regional cultures developed largely independent solutions to technical challenges. And yet, here stands a structure that behaves as though it was created within a framework of advanced geometric planning. Modern reconstruction attempts highlight the difficulty. Even with power tools, maintaining uniform spacing across a vertical rock surface requires constant recalibration. Laser levels can ensure alignment. Digital models can guide proportions. But without such tools, the process becomes exponentially more complex. Each line must be referenced against the last. Each correction must avoid amplifying error. The idea that ancient artisans achieved this without leaving behind a reproducible method is not just impressive, it is deeply problematic for our current understanding, because it introduces a gap. And in archaeology, gaps are where uncertainty becomes possibility. Perhaps there was a lost system of measurement based on chords, weights, shadow alignment, or visual triangulation that has left no trace. Perhaps teams of craftsmen worked under a master plan, executing a design transmitted through apprenticeship rather than written instruction. Or perhaps we are misjudging the capabilities of ancient builders, applying modern assumptions to minds that may have approached geometry with entirely different frameworks. In your opinion, is this a lost technique, or evidence of knowledge we have never truly understood? Share your thoughts in the comments below. At nearly 4,000 meters above sea level, where the air thins and the horizon stretches with unusual clarity, stands a structure that behaves less like a ruin and more like an instrument. The Kalasasaya temple, part of the ancient city of Tiwanaku, appears to have been engineered with a purpose that defies its age. It tracks the movement of the sun with a level of precision that should not exist in a pre-industrial world. This is not symbolic alignment. This is measurable, repeatable, and astonishingly accurate. And yet, the civilization that built it left behind no written explanation of how it was done. What we see today is not just architecture, it is a fixed system that interacts with the sky itself, a silent mechanism that continues to function exactly as it was intended, centuries after its creators vanished. Although Tiwanaku had been known to local populations for centuries, systematic archaeological attention intensified in the 19th and early 20th centuries, with figures like Arthur Poznański dedicating decades to its study. It was Poznański who first proposed that Kalasasaya was not simply ceremonial, but astronomical, a solar observatory built with intentional geometric precision. His early measurements, though initially controversial, laid the foundation for later scientific verification. By the mid-20th century, more refined surveys using modern instruments confirmed that the eastern horizon of Kalasasaya is not arbitrary. It is structured, measured, and intentionally segmented by upright stone pillars that define specific solar positions throughout the year. This was no coincidence of ruins. It was a designed observational framework. Standing at a fixed observation point within Kalasasaya, the sun does not rise randomly across the horizon. Instead, its movement is captured with an almost mechanical consistency. On the day of the summer solstice, the sun rises precisely between two designated pillars, creating a visual alignment that occurs only within a narrow window of time. On the winter solstice, the sunrise shifts dramatically to the opposite end of the structure, aligning with the farthest visible marker. During the equinoxes, the sun rises near the central axis, dividing the structure symmetrically. This creates a complete solar cycle mapped onto stone, a calendar not written in symbols, but encoded in light, horizon angles, and architectural positioning. The system does not approximate time. It measures it physically, with a repeatability that has been confirmed across generations of observation. What makes this extraordinary is not that ancient people observed the Sunday many civilizations did, from Egypt to Mesoamerica. What makes Kalasasaya different is the level of precision achieved without any known precision instruments. Measurements taken in the 20th century suggest that the angular error in the alignment is less than 1 degree. To understand the significance of this, consider Stonehenge, one of the most studied prehistoric observatories in the world. Stonehenge aligns with the summer solstice sunrise, but its construction spans centuries of gradual adjustment. Its stones were repositioned, reoriented, and refined over long periods. Kalasasaya, by contrast, appears to reflect a unified architectural plan executed with a level of foresight that suggests the builders already knew exactly where the sun would rise at its extremes before construction was completed. This implies a level of observational discipline that is difficult to reconstruct. To identify the exact solstice points, the builders would have needed to observe the horizon over multiple years, tracking the sun's gradual movement to its northernmost and southernmost limits. These extremes shift slowly, requiring patience and long-term record-keeping. Even a small miscalculation in angle would result in visible misalignment over time, yet the structure holds its precision. This suggests not only observation, but also a method of translating celestial data into ground-based geometry. How were these angles measured? How were they transferred across distances of tens of meters with such accuracy? No measuring tools, no sighting instruments, and no written calculations have been found to answer these questions. Excavations at Kalasasaya throughout the 20th century uncovered multiple construction phases, indicating that the structure may have been modified or refined over time. Archaeologists identified carefully shaped sandstone blocks forming the perimeter walls, interspersed with vertical monoliths that define the alignment grid. Some stones weigh several tons, yet they are positioned with a consistency that suggests intentional spacing rather than random placement. The joints between stones are precise, and the overall layout follows a rectangular geometry that reinforces the idea of planned design rather than organic growth. Each excavation added more physical data, but none revealed the underlying method. Carbon dating of organic materials associated with the site places its primary occupation between approximately 500 and 1000 CE. However, when modern astronomers recalculated the solar alignments using current celestial coordinates, they discovered subtle discrepancies. The sun no longer aligns perfectly with the designated pillars on the exact solstice days as it would have in the past. The difference is small, but measurable. This has led to a controversial hypothesis, that the structure was calibrated for a slightly different sky, one that existed earlier than the accepted construction timeline. This discrepancy is often linked to the phenomenon known as precession of the equinoxes, a slow shift in Earth's rotational axis that gradually alters the apparent position of the sun and stars over a cycle of roughly 26,000 years. If Kalasasaya was aligned with extreme precision at the time of its construction, then even minor shifts over centuries could produce the misalignment observed today. But this raises a deeper question. Were the builders aware of long-term celestial drift, or were they simply recording a sky that has since changed? Either possibility implies a level of astronomical awareness that has not been conclusively documented for this civilization. When compared to other ancient sites, Kalasasaya occupies a unique position. The Inca site of Machu Picchu also demonstrates solar alignment, particularly through the Intihuatana stone, which functions as a solar marker during equinoxes. However, Machu Picchu dates to the 15th century and reflects a culture with more clearly understood engineering practices. Kalasasaya predates it by centuries, yet achieves a comparable if not greater level of astronomical integration. Elsewhere, sites like Stonehenge demonstrate that prehistoric societies could align structures to celestial events, but often with broader tolerances and through incremental adaptation. Kalasasaya's alignment appears fully integrated from the outset, suggesting a level of planning that remains difficult to explain. Within Kalasasaya stands one of Tiwanaku's most iconic artifacts, the Gateway of the Sunday. Carved from a single block of andesite weighing several tons, it features a central figure surrounded by rows of smaller symbols arranged in a grid-like pattern. Some researchers have proposed that these symbols represent a calendrical system, potentially encoding solar and lunar cycles into a visual format. If this interpretation is correct, then Kalasasaya was not only aligned to the sun, it was part of a broader system that combined architecture, symbolism, and timekeeping into a unified framework. However, the carvings remain undeciphered. Multiple interpretations exist, but none have achieved consensus, leaving the gateway as both evidence and enigma. Everything about Kalasasaya points to a system of knowledge that is partially visible but fundamentally incomplete. The alignments can be measured, the solar interactions can be observed, the stones remain in their original positions, and yet the process behind it all is absent. There are no written instructions, no surviving tools, and no clear indications of the methods used to achieve such precision. What remains is the result of a process that must have involved long-term observation, geometric reasoning, and controlled construction executed in an environment where even basic logistics would have been challenging due to altitude and terrain. Do you think this is simply the result of careful observation over generations, or the trace of a lost system of knowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Near the ancient imperial heartland of the Inca world, not far from the city of Cusco, lies a remarkable archaeological site known as Rumikulka. At first glance, Rumikulka appears to be simply one of the many stone quarries that supplied building material for the monumental architecture of the Inca Empire. Yet a closer examination reveals something far more intriguing. Among the carved rock faces, partially detached blocks, and the remains of a massive stone gateway, researchers have discovered a series of astonishingly precise stone cuts that raise important questions about the technological abilities of the Inca civilization. These features, often referred to collectively as the Rumikulka gate precision cuts, represent one of the most fascinating examples of ancient stoneworking in the Andes. Rumikulka was one of the principal quarries used by the Inca state during the expansion of their empire in the 15th century. The quarry produced large quantities of andesite, a dense volcanic rock prized for its strength and durability. Andesite is significantly harder than many other types of stone commonly used in ancient construction, making it particularly difficult to shape with simple tools. Yet the Inca craftsmen who worked at Rumikulka were able to extract massive blocks and shape them with a degree of precision that continues to impress modern engineers and archaeologists alike. The stone blocks cut here were transported across the region and used in the construction of major imperial structures, including temples, administrative buildings, and defensive walls throughout the Cusco region. Some of these stones may even have been used in famous constructions such as Sacsayhuaman, whose enormous polygonal walls remain among the most iconic achievements of Inca engineering. One of the most striking elements of Rumikulka is the monumental gateway structure that stands near the quarry itself. Built from large, carefully shaped stone blocks, the gateway appears to have served as a checkpoint along one of the imperial roads that connected the capital to the eastern regions of the empire. The stones used in the gateway display the characteristic Inca masonry style, precisely cut blocks fitted together without mortar, forming stable structures capable of withstanding earthquakes and centuries of environmental wear. Each stone appears to have been shaped individually so that it would interlock perfectly with its neighbors. Even today, the seams between the blocks are so tight that it is nearly impossible to insert a blade between them. Such precision would be impressive even with modern cutting equipment. Yet the Inca achieved it using tools that were, at least according to current archaeological evidence, made primarily from stone and bronze. However, it is not simply the precision of the fitted stones that has attracted the attention of researchers. Across several rock surfaces at Rumikulka, archaeologists have documented a series of unusual linear grooves carved into the stone. These grooves run parallel to one another and often appear remarkably straight and evenly spaced. In certain places, they extend for several centimeters or even longer distances across the surface of the rock. The appearance of these marks has led many observers to describe them as resembling saw marks, as if the stone had once been cut by a large mechanical blade. This resemblance is particularly striking because the grooves possess a level of regularity that seems difficult to explain, using only simple hammering or chipping techniques. The mystery of these grooves lies in the technological context of the Inca civilization. Unlike many Old World civilizations, the Inca did not possess iron or steel tools. Their metalworking traditions focused primarily on copper, bronze, gold, and silver, materials that are far softer than hardened steel. While copper and bronze tools can certainly shape stone under the right conditions, they are not generally capable of producing the kind of long, straight cuts associated with mechanical, sawing through extremely hard rock such as andesite. For this reason, the marks found at Rumikulka present a puzzle. If they truly are the result of cutting techniques similar to sawing, what tools or methods could have produced them? Several hypotheses have been proposed to explain the grooves. One possibility is that the marks were created through a process of abrasive cutting. In this scenario, craftsmen may have used a softer tool, perhaps made from bronze or hardwood, combined with abrasive materials such as quartz sand. By applying repeated motion and pressure while adding abrasive grit, it would theoretically be possible to grind through hard stone gradually. This technique is known to have been used in various ancient cultures for drilling holes or shaping surfaces. However, while abrasive cutting can explain the ability to shape hard stone, it does not fully account for the unusually straight and consistent grooves observed at Rumikulka. Producing such uniform lines would have required an exceptional level of control and patience, suggesting that the craftsman possessed a highly refined understanding of stoneworking techniques. Another interpretation suggests that the grooves may represent guide marks created during the quarrying process. Instead of being the final cutting marks themselves, the lines may have been used to outline the boundaries of blocks before they were detached from the bedrock. Workers could have carved shallow channels along planned cutting lines, which would then guide the placement of wedges or hammering points. Over time, repeated strikes might deepen the grooves until the stone separated along the desired plane. If this explanation is correct, the grooves would represent a kind of ancient engineering blueprint carved directly into the rock surface, revealing how Inca quarry workers carefully planned the extraction of each block. Yet even with these explanations, the visual appearance of the grooves continues to provoke debate. Some researchers note that the marks appear too regular to be simple guidelines, while others argue that erosion over centuries may have altered their original form, exaggerating their resemblance to saw cuts. The challenge of interpreting the grooves is compounded by the fact that quarrying activities often leave behind incomplete or partially finished features. Without clear evidence of the exact tools used, archaeologists must rely on indirect clues and comparisons with other quarry sites across the Andes. What makes the Rumikulka grooves especially compelling is their context within a broader tradition of Inca stoneworking excellence. Across the Inca world, from Cusco to remote mountain fortresses, stone blocks display astonishing precision. Walls curve gently along natural contours of terrain, corners meet at perfect angles, and surfaces are polished so smoothly that they reflect light. These achievements suggest a deep cultural tradition of stone craftsmanship passed down through generations of specialized workers. At Rumikulka, this tradition appears in its rawest form, preserved within the quarry itself where the stones were first shaped. The presence of these enigmatic grooves therefore provides a rare glimpse into the technological processes behind Inca construction. While the finished monuments of the empire demonstrate the results of this craftsmanship, quarry sites like Rumikulka reveal the methods that made such achievements possible. The grooves carved into the andesite may represent experimental techniques, practical guides, or the traces of tools that have long since disappeared from the archaeological record. Whatever their precise origin, they serve as a reminder that ancient technologies were often far more sophisticated than we assume. Today, the gate of Rumikulka and the surrounding quarry still stand as evidence of the remarkable engineering skills of the Inca civilization. The massive stones taken from this site helped create many large structures across the Andes. However, the grooves carved into the stone remain an unanswered question. Were they created using abrasive grinding techniques, used as guidelines during quarrying, or are they traces of a stone-working method that modern science still does not fully understand? To this day, the Rumikulka gate precision cuts remain one of the most intriguing mysteries of ancient engineering. In your opinion, what technique did the Inca use to create the grooves that resemble saw marks at Rumikulka? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden deep within the barren mountains of Egypt's eastern desert lies the Mons Claudianus, one of the most remarkable industrial quarries of the ancient world. At first glance, the site appears to be little more than scattered ruins surrounded by quarry scars carved into the desert hills. However, archaeological research has shown that it was once one of the most important imperial quarries of the Roman Empire. Active from the 1st to the 3rd century CE, Mons Claudianus supplied extremely hard grey granodiorite, used in major imperial construction projects, especially in the city of Rome. What makes this site truly astonishing is not only the rare stone it produced, but also the ability of the Romans to operate a massive quarrying centre in such a harsh desert environment. The quarry lies in an unforgiving region of the eastern desert of Egypt, a place where summer temperatures regularly climb above 45 degrees Celsius, and where natural water sources are virtually non-existent. Despite these conditions, the Romans established what was effectively a fully functioning industrial settlement in the middle of this desolate landscape. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of houses, administrative buildings, bathhouses, temples, storehouses, and military barracks, indicating that hundreds, perhaps even thousands of workers, soldiers, and specialists lived and worked here at different times. Maintaining such a settlement required an immense logistical effort. Supplies had to be transported across vast desert routes from the Nile Valley, including food, tools, and most critically, water. Evidence suggests that caravans of donkeys regularly traveled between the Nile and the quarry, bringing provisions that allowed this remote outpost to function for centuries. Even with these supply routes, however, the survival of a large workforce in such a hostile environment remains one of the site's enduring mysteries. The Romans were clearly capable of sustaining a complex industrial operation far from fertile lands, but the precise scale and efficiency of this desert supply network still astonish modern historians. Yet the greatest mystery of Mons Claudianus lies not in its logistics, but in its astonishing stoneworking technology. The granodiorite quarried here is an extremely hard igneous rock, comparable in strength to granite, and notoriously difficult to shape even with modern equipment. Despite this, Roman quarry workers were able to extract enormous blocks of stone, with remarkable precision using tools that appear, at least on the surface, deceptively simple. Archaeological evidence suggests that the primary tools available were iron chisels, heavy hammers, metal wedges, and occasionally wooden wedges that could be expanded with water. At first glance, these tools seem inadequate for the task, yet the quarry faces at Mons Claudianus tell a very different story. Across the exposed rock surfaces, archaeologists have documented long, carefully aligned rows of wedge holes carved into the stone. These holes were placed with extraordinary accuracy, forming straight lines that controlled exactly where the rock would fracture. By inserting wedges and applying controlled force, quarry workers could detach massive blocks from the bedrock with surprising efficiency. The precision of these techniques becomes even more astonishing when examining the partially finished columns discovered at the site. Some of these columns measure more than 15 meters in length and were carved almost entirely from single pieces of stone. The shaping process appears to have begun directly in the quarry itself, where workers roughly sculpted the cylindrical forms before transport. The surfaces of these unfinished columns reveal subtle tool marks that demonstrate a highly systematic approach to stone removal. Instead of random hammering, the quarry workers followed consistent patterns that allowed them to gradually reduce the stone into smooth, symmetrical shapes. Modern stoneworkers have studied these marks and concluded that the process required not only physical strength but also a deep understanding of the structural properties of the rock. One wrong strike could potentially fracture the entire column, rendering weeks of labor useless. Yet the surviving evidence suggests that such catastrophic failures were surprisingly rare. This raises a fascinating question. How did Roman quarry workers achieve such accuracy with relatively simple tools? One possibility is that the craftsmen operating at Mons Claudianus were highly specialized experts trained over many years. Stone quarrying in the Roman Empire was a skilled profession, and imperial quarries likely employed some of the most experienced workers available. Another factor may have been the use of carefully planned extraction techniques developed through generations of experimentation. By observing how the rock naturally fractured, and by placing wedge holes in strategic positions, workers could harness the internal stresses of the stone to split it along predictable lines. In effect, they were not simply cutting the rock, they were persuading it to break exactly where they wanted. This sophisticated understanding of stone behavior suggests a level of empirical engineering knowledge that rarely receives enough recognition in discussions of ancient technology. Once extracted, the enormous stone blocks faced another extraordinary challenge: transportation. Some of the columns produced at Mons Claudianus weighed more than 100 tons. Moving such massive objects across rugged desert terrain would have been a daunting task even for modern machinery. Yet the Romans managed to transport these blocks over distances of more than 100 kilometers to the Nile River. The most widely accepted theory suggests that the stones were placed on large wooden sledges and dragged by teams of workers and animals along specially prepared desert roads. Archaeological surveys have identified sections of these ancient routes, along with small forts and way stations that likely supported the transport operations. After reaching the Nile, the columns could be loaded onto barges and floated downstream to major ports such as Alexandria before being shipped across the Mediterranean to Rome. The sheer scale of this logistical chain demonstrates the incredible organizational power of the Roman state, which was capable of coordinating quarry workers, desert caravans, river transport, and maritime shipping as part of a single integrated system. Equally remarkable is the water management infrastructure that supported life at Mons Claudianus. Since natural springs were absent in the area, the Romans constructed large cisterns to store water transported from distant sources or collected during rare desert rains. These reservoirs were carefully built to minimize evaporation and contamination, ensuring that precious supplies could last as long as possible. The existence of bathhouses within the settlement suggests that water availability, while limited, was sufficient to maintain aspects of Roman daily life, even in this extreme environment. Such engineering solutions reveal the adaptability of Roman technology when confronted with harsh geographical challenges. Another unique feature of the site is the discovery of hundreds of papyrus fragments preserved in the dry desert climate. These documents provide rare insights into the everyday functioning of the quarry settlement. They include administrative records, supply lists, personal letters, and official reports sent between quarry officials and Roman authorities. Through these texts, archaeologists have gained an unusually detailed picture of life at Mons Claudianus, from the organization of work crews to the distribution of food rations. The documents reveal a tightly managed operation overseen by imperial administrators, confirming that the quarry was not a small local enterprise but a strategically important industrial project directly connected to the ambitions of the Roman Empire. Despite its importance, the quarry eventually fell silent. By the 3rd century CE, activity at Mons Claudianus appears to have declined and eventually ceased altogether. The exact reasons remain uncertain. Some scholars suggest that political instability during the later Roman Empire disrupted the complex supply networks required to sustain such a remote operation. Others argue that changing architectural tastes or the availability of alternative stone sources may have reduced the need for granodiorite columns. Whatever the cause, the once bustling settlement was gradually abandoned, leaving behind only the carved scars in the mountains and the scattered ruins of buildings slowly reclaimed by the desert. Today, Mons Claudianus remains a powerful testament to the technological and organizational abilities of the ancient Romans. From this remote desert quarry, they were able to extract and transport enormous stones using skilled labor, careful planning, and advanced engineering knowledge. Among all the mysteries of the site, the precision stone-cutting techniques remain the most remarkable. Using only iron tools, wedges, and a deep understanding of the rock, Roman craftsmen shaped massive granodiorite blocks with a level of control that still impresses modern engineers. Even today, the tool marks carved into the desert hills stand as silent evidence of a technological mastery that continues to astonish nearly 2,000 years later. How do you think Roman quarry workers were able to cut and split massive granodiorite blocks with such precision using only simple tools like chisels and wedges? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Subashi ruins, located near the ancient city of Kucha in what is now Xinjiang, China, stand today as one of the most intriguing archaeological remains along the historic Silk Road. Scattered across the dry landscape of the Tarim Basin, the site appears at first like a collection of silent earthen mounds rising from the desert. Yet these weathered structures were once part of a vast Buddhist monastic complex that flourished for centuries, attracting monks, pilgrims, and travelers who moved along the great trade routes connecting East Asia with Central Asia and beyond. Although time and erosion have reduced much of the site to ruins, the scale of Subashi still hints at the extraordinary role it once played. Archaeological surveys reveal that the complex was far larger than a simple monastery. Instead, It functioned as a major religious center composed of numerous structures including stupas, prayer halls, residential quarters for monks, courtyards for ceremonies, and thick defensive walls. Stretching across a wide area on both sides of a river valley, the site indicates the presence of a large and well-organized community. The question that immediately arises, however, is why such a monumental religious complex was constructed in a region that today appears so inhospitable. The surrounding environment of the Tarim Basin is dominated by desert, harsh winds, and extreme temperature fluctuations. Modern visitors often struggle to imagine how a thriving settlement could exist in such conditions. Some scholars suggest that the region may once have had more stable water sources and fertile oases, allowing agriculture and settlement to develop around the monastery. Even so, sustaining a large religious community in such a remote environment would have required careful planning, advanced knowledge of water management, and strong economic connections to the trade networks of the Silk Road. One of the most striking features of the Subashi ruins is the remarkable durability of its architecture. The buildings were constructed primarily from rammed earth, a technique in which layers of soil are compacted tightly to form thick, solid walls. At first glance, earth might seem like a fragile material, especially in an open desert environment exposed to wind erosion for centuries. Yet many of the remaining structures have survived for well over 1,000 years. Massive walls, foundations, and platforms still stand today, some rising several meters above the surrounding ground. This durability has fascinated archaeologists, who believe that the builders of Subashi possess sophisticated knowledge about soil composition and construction methods. It is possible that the earth used in the walls was carefully mixed with organic fibers, gravel, or mineral components that increased its strength and resistance to erosion. Layering techniques may also have been used to distribute weight evenly and prevent structural collapse. Such construction methods demonstrate that the builders were highly skilled and deeply familiar with the environmental challenges of the desert. Rather than simply adapting to harsh conditions, they engineered structures capable of surviving them. Historical accounts also hint at the importance of Subashi during the height of Buddhist culture in the region. The famous Chinese monk Xuanzang, who traveled across Central Asia during the 7th century in search of sacred texts, described the kingdom of Kucha as a thriving center of Buddhist learning filled with monasteries and thousands of monks. Although the records do not provide precise architectural descriptions of Subashi itself, many historians believe that this site was among the major monastic complexes that Xuanzang encountered or heard about during his journey. The region at that time was a crossroads of cultures where Indian, Persian, and Chinese influences blended through trade and religious exchange. Monasteries such as Subashi served not only as places of worship, but also as centers of scholarship, translation, and cultural transmission. Monks living in these communities helped translate Buddhist scriptures, hosted travelers along the Silk Road, and spread religious teachings across vast distances. The presence of monumental stupas and temple structures within the ruins suggests that the complex once held impressive statues, murals, and ceremonial spaces that reflected the spiritual significance of the site. Unfortunately, much of this artistic heritage has been lost. Over centuries, sculptures and decorations disappeared through natural decay, looting, or the activities of early archaeological expeditions that removed artifacts to museums abroad. Today, only fragments remain, leaving researchers to reconstruct the past through scattered clues. Despite the impressive scale of the complex and its apparent importance in the religious landscape of ancient Central Asia, one of the most compelling mysteries surrounding Subashi concerns its eventual disappearance. By around the 10th century, the site appears to have been largely abandoned. What makes this particularly puzzling is that Subashi had existed for several centuries as a thriving monastic center connected to major trade routes. The sudden decline of such a prominent site raises difficult questions about the forces that reshaped the region during the medieval period. One possible explanation involves environmental change. The delicate ecosystems of oasis settlements in the Tarim Basin depended heavily on rivers fed by distant mountain snowmelt. If water sources shifted, dried up, or changed course over time, agriculture and settlement could quickly become unsustainable. Even small climatic shifts might have gradually reduced the productivity of the land, forcing communities to relocate closer to more reliable water supplies. Another theory focuses on the transformation of trade routes along the Silk Road. As political power shifted and new economic centers emerged elsewhere, caravans may have begun traveling along alternative paths, reducing the strategic importance of settlements like Kucha and its surrounding monasteries. Without the constant flow of merchants and pilgrims who once supported them, large religious institutions could struggle to survive. Political and cultural transformations may also have played a crucial role. Throughout the early medieval period, Central Asia experienced waves of migration, conquest, and religious change. As new powers gained control over the region, the cultural landscape shifted dramatically. In some areas, Buddhist institutions lost influence as other religious traditions expanded. Changes in political authority could disrupt the networks that had previously supported monasteries with resources, protection, and patronage. If rulers who once funded religious complexes were replaced by leaders with different priorities, the financial foundations of places like Subashi might have collapsed. Over time, even a prosperous monastery could fall into decline if its economic and social support systems disappeared. Yet despite these plausible explanations, none fully account for the scale and suddenness of the abandonment. Archaeologists have not found clear evidence of a single catastrophic event, such as warfare or natural disaster, that directly destroyed the complex. Instead, the ruins seem to suggest a gradual fading of activity rather than a dramatic destruction. This ambiguity has kept the mystery of Subashi alive among historians and archaeologists. The site represents more than just the remains of an ancient monastery. It is a window into the fragile balance that sustained life along the Silk Road for centuries. Trade networks, environmental stability, cultural exchange, and political power all work together to create thriving communities in places that might otherwise seem uninhabitable. When one or more of those elements shifted, even the most established centers could disappear from history. Subashi may therefore symbolize the vulnerability of ancient civilizations that depended on complex systems beyond their control. Today, the silent earthen walls of the ruins stand as reminders of a once vibrant spiritual center whose influence stretched across continents. Yet the reasons for its decline remain partially hidden in the sands of the Tarim Basin. Each archaeological discovery brings new insights, but the full story of how and why this remarkable city of monks faded into obscurity continues to challenge researchers. In that sense, the Subashi ruins remain not only an important historical site, but also an enduring mystery of the ancient Silk Road. What do you think truly caused the decline and disappearance of the once great Buddhist center of Subashi? Climate change, shifts in the Silk Road trade routes, or political upheavals in the region? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Deep in the mountains of southern Colombia, within the misty highlands surrounding the upper Magdalena River Valley, lies one of the most mysterious archaeological landscapes in the Americas, the stone statues of San Agustin Archaeological Park. Scattered across hills, burial mounds, and ancient ceremonial platforms are more than 500 monumental sculptures carved directly from massive blocks of volcanic rock. Some statues stand barely a meter tall, while others rise more than 7 meters above the ground and weigh several tons. These enigmatic figures, often depicting human forms combined with jaguars, birds, serpents, or other powerful animals, were created by a civilization that flourished roughly between the 1st century BCE and the 8th century CE. Yet despite more than a century of research, archaeologists still do not know exactly who these people were, what language they spoke, or why they disappeared. Among all the mysteries surrounding San Agustin, one of the most astonishing, and still debated, is the extraordinary stone carving technology used to produce these sculptures from some of the hardest volcanic rocks in the region. The majority of the statues were carved from andesite and basalt, two dense volcanic stones formed from ancient lava flows in the Andes. On the Mohs hardness scale, basalt and andesite can approach values around 6 or higher, making them significantly more difficult to carve than softer stones, such as limestone or sandstone, which were commonly used in many ancient civilizations. For comparison, the builders of the Great Pyramid of Giza primarily shaped limestone blocks, while even many classical Greek sculptures were carved from relatively workable marble. At San Agustin, however, ancient artisans were shaping extremely resistant volcanic rock with a precision that continues to surprise modern researchers. Detailed examination of the statues reveals sharp incised lines, symmetrical facial features, deep recessed eyes, and carefully sculpted teeth and claws. In many cases, the surfaces appear deliberately flattened and polished, suggesting a controlled and systematic carving process rather than simple rough shaping. Archaeological investigations into these sculptures began in earnest in the early 20th century. In 1913, the German ethnologist Konrad Theodor Preuss conducted one of the first scientific expeditions to document the monuments. Preuss mapped dozens of statues and burial mounds and was astonished by the level of craftsmanship visible in the stonework. Later excavations throughout the 1930s and 1940s revealed that many statues were positioned above elaborate tombs constructed from large stone slabs. Beneath these mounds, archaeologists discovered burial chambers containing ceramics, gold ornaments, and ritual offerings, suggesting that the statues served as guardians or symbolic protectors of the dead. Yet the technical question remained unresolved. How did a society without known metal tools capable of cutting hard volcanic rock produce such refined sculptures? One theory proposes that artisans used extremely hard hammerstones made from quartzite or similar materials to slowly chip away at the surface. Experiments conducted by modern archaeologists attempting to replicate the technique have shown that shaping volcanic rock with stone tools is possible, but extremely labor-intensive. In some experimental reconstructions, creating even a small, detailed figure required hundreds of hours of continuous work. Scaling this effort to the monumental statues of San Agustin, some weighing several tons, would imply an enormous investment of labor and highly specialized craftsmanship. Yet despite extensive excavations across the region, relatively few stone tools directly associated with the sculpting process have been found, leaving many scholars uncertain about the exact techniques employed. Another intriguing detail lies in the consistency of the statue's iconography and proportions. Many figures display strikingly symmetrical facial structures, evenly spaced eyes, and carefully balanced compositions. In certain sculptures, the depth of carved grooves and the angles of the lines remain remarkably uniform across the entire monument. Such precision suggests that the sculptors may have used guiding techniques, perhaps charcoal sketches, string measurements, or geometric planning, before carving the stone. Comparable levels of geometric planning are seen in the polygonal masonry of Sacsayhuaman, where Inca builders achieved extraordinary stone-fitting precision. However, unlike the Inca structures, the San Agustin statues are not merely structural blocks, but complex three-dimensional sculptures with intricate symbolic features. Equally puzzling is the apparent quarrying and transportation process. Geological studies indicate that many statues were carved from local volcanic outcrops, yet some appear to have been moved from quarries located several kilometers away. Transporting multi-ton stone blocks through steep Andean terrain covered with dense vegetation would have required coordinated manpower and possibly wooden rollers or sledges. Yet no clear evidence of large-scale transport infrastructure has been discovered. Similar mysteries surround other megalithic sites across the world, such as the massive stones of Baalbek, where ancient builders moved enormous blocks without technologies that historians would normally associate with such engineering feats. Beyond their technical sophistication, the statues themselves present an iconographic mystery. Many depict beings with exaggerated fangs, wide circular eyes, and animal attributes, often associated with the jaguar, one of the most powerful symbols in ancient American cosmology. Some statues appear to show figures holding severed heads or ceremonial staffs, while others combine human bodies with bird or reptilian features. Scholars believe these images may represent mythological guardians, priests, or deities connected to the afterlife. Their placement near burial chambers reinforces the interpretation that they played a role in funerary rituals or spiritual protection. Despite decades of excavation, however, the civilization responsible for these sculptures remains largely unknown. Radiocarbon dating of associated organic materials suggests that the statues were created over a period spanning several centuries, roughly between the 1st century BCE and the 8th century CE. By the time Spanish explorers entered the region in the 16th century, the culture that built the monuments had long disappeared. No written language or historical record survives to explain their beliefs, their social organization, or the precise methods they used to carve their remarkable monuments. Today, San Agustin is recognized as one of the most important archaeological sites in South America and has been designated a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. Yet even with modern archaeological techniques, satellite mapping, and geological analysis, many aspects of the statues remain unresolved. The extraordinary craftsmanship visible in these sculptures, carved from some of the hardest volcanic stones in the Andes, continues to challenge assumptions about the technological capabilities of ancient societies in the region. Standing silently across the Colombian highlands, the statues of San Agustin seem less like simple monuments and more like enduring messages from a lost civilization, carved into stone so hard that their creators clearly intended them to survive for millennia. In your opinion, how could an ancient civilization precisely carve extremely hard volcanic rock like the statues at San Agustin thousands of years ago? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Hidden beneath the limestone hills of northern Israel lies one of the most remarkable underground burial complexes ever discovered in the ancient world, the Beit Shearim catacombs. Located near the ancient city of Beit Shearim, this vast subterranean necropolis dates primarily to the 2nd through 4th centuries CE and is widely associated with the burial place of Judah Hanasi, a towering figure in Jewish history. The catacombs first attracted modern archaeological attention in 1936, when excavations led by the Israeli archaeologist Benjamin Mazar began to reveal a labyrinth of chambers carved deep into the bedrock. What initially appeared to be a modest burial cave soon proved to be only the entrance to an immense underground complex. Over the decades that followed, archaeologists uncovered more than 30 catacomb systems spread across the hillside, containing hundreds of burial chambers and an extraordinary collection of stone sarcophagi. The sheer scale of the underground network alone is impressive, but what truly fascinates historians and archaeologists is the astonishing craftsmanship displayed in the stone coffins found inside these chambers. These sarcophagi represent some of the most sophisticated examples of funerary stone carving from the late Roman world. Many of them were carved from heavy blocks of limestone that could weigh several tons, yet their surfaces display an extraordinary level of precision and artistic detail. Decorative motifs include lions, eagles, mythological creatures, elaborate floral patterns, geometric borders, and religious symbols such as the seven-branch menorah. In some cases, entire architectural facades appear carved into the coffin lids, with columns, pediments, and miniature temple fronts sculpted directly from the stone. The level of craftsmanship rivals that seen in high-status Roman sarcophagi found in cities like Rome or Antioch, yet here these works were produced in a remote hillside necropolis, far from the major imperial centers of the Mediterranean. Researchers examining these carvings have noted that many of the decorative elements display near-perfect symmetry, with balanced proportions and deeply cut lines that remain sharp even after nearly 2,000 years. Some of the ornamental grooves are only a few millimeters wide yet extend across long surfaces without deviation, suggesting that the artisans possessed remarkable control over their tools. The technical challenge becomes even more striking when considering the environment in which these coffins were produced and installed. The catacombs themselves were carved directly into solid limestone beneath the surface of the hill. Narrow corridors lead to larger halls where dozens of sarcophagi are arranged side by side. Some of the largest chambers measure more than 10 meters across and contain massive stone coffins aligned in rows along the walls. Moving such heavy objects into confined underground spaces would have required careful planning, specialized labor, and coordinated effort. Yet there is little direct archaeological evidence describing the methods used to transport and position these massive stones. Unlike surface tombs where cranes or large ramps might have been employed, the underground environment of Beit Shearim would have severely limited the use of large lifting equipment. This raises a fascinating question. Were the sarcophagi carved outside the catacombs and then carried inside? Or were some of them shaped within the chambers themselves after the blocks had been lowered into the caves? Both possibilities present significant logistical challenges that researchers are still attempting to understand. Archaeological excavations carried out throughout the 20th century gradually revealed the extraordinary diversity of these sarcophagi. During major excavation campaigns in the 1950s and 1960s, researchers documented hundreds of coffins across multiple catacomb complexes. Some are simple rectangular boxes, while others display elaborate sculptural programs covering every visible surface. One particularly famous chamber, often referred to as the Hall of the Coffins, contains more than 40 decorated sarcophagi arranged around the perimeter of a large underground hall. Many of them carry inscriptions written in Greek, Hebrew, or Aramaic, indicating that the individuals buried there came from communities across the Mediterranean world. Scholars have identified names associated with cities as distant as Palmyra, Tyre, and even regions of southern Arabia. This suggests that Beit Shearim became an internationally recognized burial site within the Jewish diaspora, attracting individuals who wished to be interred in what was considered sacred ground. Transporting bodies across such distances during antiquity was already a complex process, but transporting heavy stone sarcophagi for burial within these caves would have been an even greater logistical undertaking. The precision of the carvings has also led researchers to examine the tools used by the ancient craftsmen. Traditional iron chisels and hammerstones were certainly available in the Roman period, yet the clean lines and consistent depth seen in many carvings indicate a level of technical mastery that required both experience and specialized technique. Some grooves appear so regular that they almost resemble the results of guided cutting tools. When compared with other funerary carvings from the same era, such as the stone sarcophagi of Roman Syria or Asia Minor, the Beit Shearim examples stand out for their distinctive fusion of cultural motifs. Classical Greco-Roman imagery appears alongside clearly Jewish symbols, reflecting the multicultural environment of the Eastern Mediterranean during the late Roman period. This blending of artistic traditions further suggests that highly skilled artisans were working within the site, perhaps traveling craftsmen who specialized in funerary sculpture. Yet no workshop areas have been clearly identified within the catacombs themselves, leaving open the possibility that many coffins were carved elsewhere before being transported into the caves. Beyond the artistry of the sarcophagi, the engineering of the catacomb complex itself adds another layer of mystery. The underground passages were carved through solid limestone using manual tools, yet the corridors often run remarkably straight and connect multiple chambers with careful geometric alignment. Some rooms contain vaulted ceilings that appear intentionally shaped to prevent collapse, demonstrating a clear understanding of structural stability within underground spaces. The creation of such a large and coherent subterranean complex would have required careful planning long before the first chisel struck the rock. However, the methods used by ancient engineers to map and coordinate excavation beneath the hillside remain uncertain. Without modern surveying equipment or artificial lighting systems, maintaining straight corridors and symmetrical chamber layouts deep underground would have been extremely difficult. Oil lamps discovered in the catacombs provide evidence of illumination, but their dim light would have made detailed stone carving particularly challenging. Today, the Beit Shearim catacombs are recognized as one of the most important archaeological sites in Israel and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Yet despite decades of research, many questions remain. The massive stone sarcophagi intricately carved and placed deep within the underground chambers still puzzle researchers. How were multi-ton coffins transported through narrow corridors without damaging their delicate carvings? And why did people from across the ancient Mediterranean choose this remote hillside for burial? Even today, the catacombs continue to reveal how much about ancient engineering and craftsmanship remains unknown. Could the extremely intricate carvings on the stone sarcophagi inside Beit Shearim catacombs really have been created using only ancient hand tools, or did ancient craftsmen possess techniques that we still do not fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. High on a barren plateau in the southern Sinai Peninsula lies one of the most unusual industrial and religious landscapes of the ancient Egyptian world, Serabit el-Khadim. Unlike the monumental temples and bustling cities along the fertile banks of the Nile, this site sits in a harsh and isolated desert environment where survival itself is difficult. Wind-carved sandstone ridges dominate the landscape, temperatures fluctuate dramatically, and natural water sources are almost non-existent. Yet more than 3,500 years ago, Egyptian expeditions repeatedly travelled across hundreds of kilometres of unforgiving desert to reach this remote plateau. Their objective was turquoise, one of the most valued gemstones in the ancient Near East. From the Middle Kingdom onward, Egyptian rulers organised large mining missions to Serabit el-Khadim, sending administrators, miners, soldiers, priests, scribes and supplies across Sinai. Archaeological evidence shows that these expeditions were not small or occasional ventures, but sustained operations carried out over centuries. The existence of such a large-scale mining complex in such a hostile environment immediately raises one of the central mysteries of Serabit el-Khadim: how ancient societies were able to organize, supply, and maintain industrial activity so far from their agricultural heartlands. Maintaining a workforce in this desert would have required enormous logistical coordination. Water, food, tools, animals, and construction materials all had to be transported across the desert caravan routes. Even more intriguing is the fact that the Egyptians did not establish merely a temporary mining camp. Instead, they created a ritual landscape centered around a temple dedicated to the goddess Hathor, often called the Lady of Turquoise. This temple complex gradually expanded over several dynasties, filled with stelae, statues, and inscriptions commemorating royal mining expeditions. The presence of such a sacred complex suggests that mining at Serabit el-Khadim was not simply economic but also religious and political, reinforcing the pharaoh's control over valuable resources while invoking divine protection over the dangerous work carried out in the mines. However, the most fascinating and technologically mysterious aspect of Serabit el-Khadim lies beneath the surface of the plateau itself. The turquoise deposits here are not loose stones that could easily be collected from the ground. Instead, they occur in thin veins embedded within layers of hard sandstone and mineralized rock. To extract them, ancient miners had to cut directly into the rock face, following narrow seams that often twisted through the surrounding stone. Archaeological surveys have revealed dozens of ancient mining zones scattered across the plateau, each containing clusters of tunnels, carved chambers, and extraction pits. Many of these features demonstrate a remarkable level of precision. The interior surfaces of certain cavities appear surprisingly smooth and deliberate, suggesting that miners were able to remove rock in a controlled and methodical way rather than simply smashing their way through the stone. This presents a significant technological puzzle. During much of the period when Serabit el-Khadim was active, iron tools had not yet become common in Egypt. The primary metal tools available to miners were made of copper or bronze, both of which are relatively soft compared to the sandstone and mineralized rock that surrounded the turquoise veins. In modern terms, attempting to carve into hard stone using copper implements alone would seem extremely inefficient. Yet the evidence at Serabit el-Khadim shows that ancient miners were able to produce extensive networks of tunnels and extraction chambers with considerable success. Researchers have proposed several possible explanations for how this was achieved. One theory suggests that the miners relied heavily on stone tools, such as pounding stones made from harder rocks like dolerite. These heavy stones could have been used to repeatedly strike the rock face, gradually breaking it apart. Another hypothesis involves a technique known as fire setting, a method documented in various ancient mining regions. In this process, miners would build fires against a rock surface, heating it to high temperatures. Once the stone was sufficiently heated, cold water would be poured onto it, causing the rock to crack due to rapid thermal expansion and contraction. These fractures would weaken the rock, making it easier to break apart using simpler tools. While traces of burning have been suggested in some areas, definitive proof of widespread fire setting at Serabit el-Khadim remains debated. A third possibility is that miners exploited natural weaknesses within the sandstone itself. Sandstone can fracture along bedding planes or mineral veins, and skilled miners may have learned to identify these natural lines of weakness, allowing them to remove stone more efficiently. Even if these methods were used, however, the level of organization required to maintain dozens of mining zones across the plateau suggests a sophisticated understanding of geology and resource management. The miners clearly knew where turquoise deposits were most likely to occur, and how to follow the veins through the rock without collapsing the tunnels or wasting effort in barren areas. Equally remarkable is the scale of the mining network. Across the plateau, archaeologists have documented numerous extraction areas, each containing multiple pits and tunnels. Some galleries penetrate deep into the rock, branching into narrow passages that follow turquoise-bearing seams. Others consist of shallow chambers carved directly into the cliff faces. Taken together, these features represent one of the earliest large-scale mining landscapes known in the ancient world. The workers who carved these tunnels were not improvising randomly. They were conducting systematic exploration and extraction. Supervisors likely directed the work, ensuring that labor was concentrated in the most productive zones. This implies that the Egyptians possessed not only practical mining techniques, but also a structured administrative system capable of organizing large labor forces in remote regions. Beyond the mines themselves, Serabit el-Khadim also holds another extraordinary historical significance. Carved into rocks and monuments around the site are some of the earliest known examples of Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions. These inscriptions consist of simplified symbols that appear to represent individual sounds rather than complex words or concepts like Egyptian hieroglyphs. Many scholars believe that this system represents an early stage in the development of alphabetic writing. The people who carved these inscriptions were likely Semitic-speaking workers employed in the Egyptian mining expeditions. By adapting certain hieroglyphic symbols to represent consonant sounds in their own language, they may have created one of the first alphabetic scripts in human history. Over time, this writing system may have evolved into the Phoenician alphabet, which later influenced Greek and Latin scripts used throughout much of the modern world. In this sense, the isolated mining plateau of Serabit el-Khadim may have played an unexpected role in one of humanity's most important intellectual innovations, the alphabet. Even today, many aspects of Serabit el-Khadim remain unexplained. Archaeologists still debate how ancient miners were able to cut through the hard sandstone surrounding the turquoise veins, and the logistics of supplying large expeditions across the Sinai Desert are only partly understood. The unusual combination of large-scale mining, a remote temple dedicated to Hathor, and some of the earliest alphabetic inscriptions continues to intrigue historians. All of this suggests that Serabit el-Khadim was far more than a simple mining camp. It was a complex frontier outpost where technology, religion, and cultural interaction met in the harsh desert landscape. Even after centuries of study, the site remains one of the most fascinating mysteries of the ancient world. How do you think ancient miners were able to cut and extract turquoise from the hard rock at Serabit el-Khadim using only relatively soft copper tools? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments section below. The Valley Temple of Khafre stands at the edge of the Giza Plateau as one of the most intriguing architectural structures associated with the pyramid complex of the 4th dynasty pharaoh Khafre, who ruled Egypt around the 26th century BCE. Unlike many other temples of ancient Egypt built primarily from limestone blocks, this structure was constructed using enormous slabs of red granite transported from the quarries of Aswan, located nearly 800 kilometers to the south along the Nile. Archaeological excavations carried out during the 19th and early 20th centuries, most notably those directed by the German Egyptologist Ludwig Borchardt, and later studied by numerous architectural historians, revealed that the temple was not only remarkably well preserved, but also built with a level of stone precision that continues to provoke debate among engineers, archaeologists, and historians alike. Inside the temple, massive granite blocks weighing between 40 and 50 tons each form walls that appear almost seamless, their surfaces polished and fitted so tightly that in many places even a thin blade cannot be inserted between them. Granite is one of the hardest stones commonly used in ancient architecture, with a hardness approaching 7 on the Mohs scale, which means shaping it requires tools capable of exerting tremendous force and maintaining consistent precision. According to the traditional archaeological interpretation, Egyptian workers primarily used copper chisels, stone pounding tools made of diorite, and abrasive sand to cut and shape granite. However, when modern engineers attempt to replicate the same degree of flatness and precision using only these tools, the process proves extraordinarily slow and labor-intensive, raising questions about how ancient craftsmen could have produced such vast quantities of perfectly dressed stone within the time frame of a single royal construction project. The interior of the temple further intensifies this mystery. 16 monolithic granite pillars once stood in the central hall, each carved from a single block and polished to an almost mirror-like finish. Their edges are remarkably straight and their angles close to perfect right angles, suggesting careful measurement and advanced planning. Beneath these pillars lies a floor composed of large black basalt slabs, another extremely hard volcanic stone that would have required sophisticated cutting techniques. These basalt slabs are arranged with striking precision, forming a smooth and stable floor surface that has endured for more than 4,000 years. Archaeologists have also discovered that the outer casing of the temple was originally covered with finely polished white limestone from the quarries of Tura, creating a dramatic visual contrast with the dark granite interior. This combination of different stone types, each with very different hardness and structural properties, would have required an advanced understanding of stoneworking and architectural planning. Comparable levels of stone precision are sometimes seen in other ancient monuments, such as the carefully aligned blocks of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the polygonal masonry of Pumapunku, or the enormous megalithic stones of Baalbek Trilithon. Yet the Valley Temple is unique because it combines enormous block size with extremely tight joints and highly polished surfaces within a single structure. Despite decades of research, some of the most fascinating aspects of the temple remain unresolved. The technical mysteries surrounding its construction continue to challenge conventional explanations. One of the most debated questions concerns the cutting and shaping of granite itself. Granite is significantly harder than copper, the primary metal known to have been used in Egyptian tools during the Old Kingdom. Experimental archaeology has shown that granite can indeed be worked using copper tools and abrasive sand, but producing surfaces as flat and smooth as those found in the Valley Temple would require enormous time and careful craftsmanship. Some granite blocks within the temple show surfaces that appear almost machine-like in their regularity, leading a few researchers to suggest that ancient craftsmen may have employed techniques that are not yet fully understood, possibly involving advanced abrasive processes or highly specialized stoneworking methods that have left little archaeological evidence behind. Another unresolved issue involves the precision with which the blocks were fitted together. Many of the joints between stones show no evidence of mortar or binding material. Instead, the stones appear to have been carefully shaped so that their surfaces fit together with near-perfect contact, creating structural stability through sheer weight and friction. Achieving this kind of fit requires extremely careful measurement and alignment. Yet the tools used for such precise measurement during the Old Kingdom are still a matter of debate. Wooden measuring rods, plumb lines, and leveling instruments are known from later Egyptian contexts, but the exact techniques used to ensure perfect alignment of blocks weighing dozens of tons remain uncertain. Transportation also presents a formidable puzzle. The granite blocks used in the temple were quarried in Aswan, where archaeologists have identified ancient quarry marks and partially carved blocks that provide insight into Egyptian stone extraction methods. However, moving blocks weighing 40 tons or more over a distance of hundreds of kilometers would have required a complex logistical operation involving river barges, sledges, and large labor forces. Relief carvings from later periods depict the transportation of large statues on sledges pulled by workers over lubricated ground, but scaling this method up to move dozens of massive granite blocks remains a challenge that modern researchers continue to analyze. Finally, there is the question of polishing. The granite surfaces within the temple are not merely cut, they are also polished to a level that reflects light and gives the stone a refined, almost ceremonial appearance. Modern granite polishing typically involves mechanical grinding with increasingly fine abrasives, yet the exact sequence of tools and abrasives used by ancient Egyptian craftsmen is still debated. Some scholars believe that quartz sand combined with stone polishing tools may have produced the effect, while others argue that achieving such uniform polish across massive surfaces would have required techniques far more sophisticated than currently understood. These unresolved questions are what make the Valley Temple of Khafre so fascinating to archaeologists and historians today. While mainstream Egyptology credits its construction to the organized labor and engineering knowledge of Egypt's Old Kingdom, the remarkable precision of its granite masonry still raises debates about the techniques used. Even after decades of research, the complete explanation of how such massive and precise stone architecture was achieved more than 4,000 years ago remains uncertain, leaving the temple as both a monument to Khafre and a lasting mystery of ancient engineering. How do you think the ancient Egyptians were able to cut, transport, and fit these massive granite blocks with such astonishing precision? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Rising from a limestone plateau overlooking the valleys of southwestern Crimea, the ancient cave settlement known as Eski Kerman Cave City appears at first glance like a natural cliff formation. But a closer look reveals something far more extraordinary. Hidden within the rock face are hundreds of precisely carved chambers, corridors, stairways, and sanctuaries. Archaeologists estimate that more than 340 artificial caves were cut directly into the limestone plateau, forming an entire city sculpted from solid rock. The site is believed to have emerged around the 6th century during the frontier expansion of the Byzantine Empire, when fortified settlements were established to defend trade routes and agricultural valleys. Yet even with this historical context, the scale and technical execution of Eski Kerman remain deeply puzzling. Unlike ordinary rock shelters created by erosion, nearly every chamber here bears clear signs of deliberate engineering. Walls appear remarkably flat, ceilings curve smoothly, and corners often meet at angles so consistent that some researchers have compared the interiors to spaces shaped with modern stone-cutting tools. The most striking mystery of Eski Kerman lies in the creation of its immense network of caves. More than 300 rooms are distributed across several levels of the plateau, connected by stairways and narrow passages carved directly into the stone. Some chambers are small, domestic spaces barely large enough for a family, while others are spacious halls used for storage or gatherings. Archaeologists studying the site have identified caves used as homes, wine cellars, granaries, chapels, and defensive galleries. In many cases, the rock floors include carved troughs, shelves, and benches that were formed from the same block of stone as the surrounding walls. This means the builders did not assemble structures piece by piece. They sculpted entire rooms from a single mass of limestone. To carve such spaces would have required enormous labor. Experiments conducted by archaeologists suggest that even with iron chisels, removing a single cubic meter of limestone by hand could take many days of work. Considering that some of the larger caves at Eski Kerman measure several meters in height and depth, the creation of hundreds of such chambers would represent thousands of hours of continuous stone cutting. The scale becomes even more impressive when compared with other cave cities of the region. Sites such as Mangup Kale Cave Fortress or Chufut Kale Cave City also feature rock-cut architecture, yet Eski Kerman stands out for the density and organization of its caves. Many of the chambers are aligned along narrow terraces that follow the contour of the plateau, suggesting a carefully planned urban layout rather than random excavation. In some areas, the caves appear stacked vertically, creating a multi-level structure similar to an apartment complex carved into stone. This raises a key question. How did the builders maintain such consistent geometry without modern measuring instruments? Archaeologists studying tool marks have identified patterns consistent with iron chisels and picks. But the precision of many surfaces suggests that the workers followed strict construction methods, possibly guided by wooden templates or cords used as measuring lines. The mystery deepens when examining the defensive design of the caves. Eski Kerman was not simply a collection of dwellings. It functioned as a fortified settlement controlling the surrounding valleys. The plateau itself rises roughly 300 meters above the surrounding landscape, with steep cliffs forming natural walls on most sides. Only a few narrow paths allow access to the summit. Along these routes, archaeologists have found caves carved specifically for defense, including chambers with narrow openings that resemble arrow slits. From inside these spaces, defenders could observe approaching enemies while remaining protected by thick layers of stone. Some vertical shafts appear to have been used to drop stones or boiling liquids onto attackers attempting to climb the slopes. The integration of architecture and terrain suggests a sophisticated understanding of military strategy, comparable in concept to later medieval fortresses. Archaeological research at Eski Kerman began in earnest during the 19th century, when explorers first documented the caves and mapped the plateau. More systematic excavations were conducted in the 20th century by Soviet archaeologists who uncovered fragments of pottery, metal tools, and religious objects within the chambers. These discoveries confirmed that the caves were inhabited for several centuries, likely from the 6th through the 13th century. The evidence of churches carved into the rock further indicates the presence of a Christian community connected to Byzantine cultural traditions. In one cave chapel, faint traces of frescoes were discovered on the walls, suggesting that the stone interior once served as a decorated place of worship. The presence of such religious spaces reinforces the idea that Eski Kerman was not merely a military outpost, but a fully developed town. Another remarkable aspect of the cave system is the presence of water infrastructure carved directly into the rock. On a plateau where natural springs are scarce, the survival of a permanent settlement would have depended on careful water management. Archaeologists have identified reservoirs and channels designed to collect rainwater and direct it into storage basins. One of the larger cisterns is estimated to have held tens of thousands of litres of water. The floors of these basins were carved with subtle slopes to ensure that water flowed toward collection points rather than stagnating. Such engineering suggests that the builders possessed practical knowledge of hydraulic principles, even if their techniques were developed through experience rather than formal science. Yet despite decades of research, the greatest question remains the same. How was such a vast network of caves created with the technology available at the time? Iron chisels and hammers could certainly cut limestone, but producing hundreds of chambers with relatively smooth walls would have required extraordinary coordination and labour. Some researchers believe that the work may have been carried out gradually over generations, with each new family expanding the caves as the population grew. Others argue that at least part of the complex must have been excavated during a concentrated construction phase directed by a centralized authority. The truth may lie somewhere between these possibilities, but definitive evidence remains elusive. The final mystery surrounding Eski Kerman concerns its sudden decline. Archaeological evidence suggests that the settlement was abandoned sometime in the 13th century, possibly during the wave of destruction associated with the Mongol invasions of Europe. However, some artifacts indicate that parts of the city may have been deserted even earlier. The caves that once housed families, stored harvests, and echoed with daily life gradually fell silent, leaving behind an empty labyrinth carved into the cliffs. Today, the plateau stands as a silent monument to a society capable of shaping an entire city from living rock. The hundreds of caves of Eski Kerman remain a powerful reminder that ancient communities often possess technical skills far more advanced than we assume. Even after centuries of study, the question still lingers among archaeologists and historians alike. What methods, organization, and determination allowed the builders of this forgotten city to transform a barren limestone plateau into one of the most remarkable cave settlements ever created? How were ancient builders able to carve more than 300 caves into the rock cliffs of Eski Kerman Cave City with such remarkable precision using only primitive tools. What techniques do you think they used? Share your thoughts in the comments below. High above the dense forests of western India, rising nearly 700 meters into the sky, the staircase of Kalavantin Durg cuts into a near-vertical wall of basalt, and at first glance, it looks like a path dangerous, narrow, intimidating, but the longer you study it, the more it begins to resemble something else entirely, a technical paradox carved into stone, because this is not simply a staircase, it is a construction problem that modern engineering can explain only in fragments, a structure that exists physically, yet resists complete reconstruction in theory, as if the process that created it has been erased, while the result remains suspended in time. The first documented surveys of Kalavantin Durg by British colonial officers in the 19th century treated the structure as a defensive hill fort, likely associated with regional powers such as the Marathas, and early descriptions focused on its strategic value, its commanding view over ancient trade routes, and its natural isolation. Yet even in those early reports, one detail stood out with unusual intensity. The steps, carved directly into the rock face, ascending at angles approaching 70 to 80 degrees, in several sections narrowing to less than half a meter in width, with no railings, no anchors, no visible sockets for scaffolding, only a sequence of carefully cut footholds rising into open air, defying not only comfort but expectation, because even today, standing at the base and looking up, it is difficult to imagine not just climbing them but creating them. Subsequent archaeological attention, particularly throughout the 20th century, shifted toward material analysis and comparative study, revealing that the rock itself belongs to the Deccan Traps, a massive volcanic formation composed primarily of dense basalt, known for its strength and resistance to erosion. And through field testing alongside comparisons with nearby monumental sites such as Ellora Caves, researchers confirmed that ancient Indian craftsmen possessed the necessary tools, iron chisels, hammerstones, and controlled percussion techniques to cut and shape this material with remarkable precision, as demonstrated by Ellora, where entire multi-story temple complexes were carved downward from solid rock with alignment accuracy measured in centimeters. Yet Kalavantin Durg introduces a critical variable absent from those sites, because while Ellora was carved from stable horizontal working surfaces with predictable access, here the work surface is a near vertical cliff, a plane where balance, positioning, and even survival become uncertain variables, and that single difference transforms a known capability into an unresolved mystery. Later field measurements conducted by trekking groups and independent surveyors documented the geometry of the staircase in greater detail, showing that while the steps are not perfectly uniform, they follow a consistent functional pattern, with tread depths averaging between 15 and 20 centimeters, just sufficient for a human foothold and riser heights, adapting dynamically to the natural contours of the rock while still maintaining a climbable rhythm, suggesting that the builders were not carving randomly but were instead following an intentional system, a logic embedded into each cut, and this level of consistency implies coordination among multiple workers, shared understanding of spacing, and possibly even a conceptual design before execution. Yet despite this apparent organization, no inscriptions, no quarry marks, no tool signatures, and no construction diagrams have ever been discovered, leaving behind only the completed form without any surviving evidence of the method that produced it. And it is here, at the level of method, that the mystery becomes most resistant to explanation, because while the material can be identified and the geometry can be measured, the process itself remains hidden. And one widely discussed hypothesis suggests that the staircase was carved from the top downward, meaning that workers first reached the summit by an alternative route, perhaps a natural ridge or slope that has since eroded away, and then progressively cut the steps as they descended, a technique that aligns with known practices at other rock-cut sites across India. Yet this hypothesis immediately encounters a critical contradiction, because extensive surveys of the surrounding terrain have failed to identify any viable ancient access path capable of supporting the movement of tools, labour, and materials to the summit, with the slopes around Kalavantin remaining steep, unstable, and in many areas effectively inaccessible even to modern climbers without specialised equipment, raising the possibility that the original access route, if it existed at all, has been completely lost to geological time. A second hypothesis proposes the construction of wooden scaffolding rising from the base of the cliff, suggesting that temporary frameworks made from timber could have provided platforms for workers to stand on while carving each step upward in sequence. Yet this theory too faces significant challenges, as no archaeological evidence of such scaffolding has been found, no post holes drilled into the rock, no anchor points, no remnants of organic material preserved in crevices, and beyond the absence of evidence lies a deeper structural question. Because the cliff face is exposed to strong seasonal monsoon winds and intense rainfall, conditions that would place enormous stress on any wooden structure attempting to cling to such a vertical surface, making the long-term stability of such scaffolding highly questionable. A third line of speculation explores the possibility of rope-based construction techniques, where workers may have used fibre ropes, primitive harness systems, or bodyweight anchoring methods to suspend themselves against the rock while carving, drawing loose parallels with certain traditional climbing practices observed in isolated cultures. Yet this hypothesis remains speculative at best, as no tools, no visual depictions, and no surviving artifacts directly connect such methods to the builders of Kalavantin Durg. And even if such techniques were employed, they do not fully resolve the core problem, because while it is possible to climb a vertical surface using ropes, the act of carving consistent, load-bearing steps into hard basalt while suspended in mid-air introduces a level of complexity that even modern climbers with advanced gear and safety systems rarely attempt, and certainly do not perform with the precision observed here. When placed alongside other ancient rock-cut achievements, the uniqueness of Kalavantin becomes even more pronounced, because at Petra, monumental structures were carved into sandstone cliffs but relied on ledges and constructed platforms that provided stable working conditions. And at Machu Picchu, steep stairways were integrated into mountainous terrain, yet supported by terraces and retaining walls that distributed weight and provided access. Whereas Kalavantin Durg eliminates these supporting systems entirely, isolating the act of carving from any stable base, reducing the process to a direct interaction between human and vertical stone. And it is precisely this isolation that makes the site so difficult to reconcile with known construction methodologies. Time itself adds another layer to the puzzle, as erosion patterns indicate that the steps have endured for several centuries, possibly dating back to medieval periods or earlier, with edges worn yet still structurally intact. And despite continuous exposure to heavy rainfall, temperature variation, and natural weathering, the staircase remains usable, suggesting that the builders not only understood how to cut basalt, but also how to select sections of rock less prone to fracturing, working with the natural grain and internal structure of the material to maximize durability, an insight that implies accumulated knowledge rather than isolated experimentation. Yet no intermediate stages of development have been identified, no abandoned staircases, no incomplete sections, no gradual evolution of technique, leaving Kalavantin to appear in the historical record as a fully realized concept without visible precursors. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this entire structure lies not in what has been discovered, but in what remains absent, because archaeology depends as much on process as it does on outcome. And here, the process is missing, leaving only a finished artifact that suggests a sequence of actions we cannot fully reconstruct. With each proposed explanation containing gaps, each theory relying on assumptions that cannot be verified, and in that absence, the staircase becomes more than a physical object. It becomes a boundary marker, defining the limits of current understanding. Kalavantin Durg forces that boundary into focus, suggesting that ancient builders may have possessed not only the physical capability to shape hard volcanic stone, but also the spatial awareness, coordination, and adaptive strategies required to operate in environments that remain challenging even today, challenging the modern assumption that complex construction is inseparable from advanced technology, and raising a possibility that is difficult to dismiss, that the limitations we attribute to ancient engineering may reflect gaps in our interpretation rather than gaps in their ability. In your opinion, how was the Kalavantin Durg staircase built under such seemingly impossible conditions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A.